All right. Chapter 23. Melbourne, age January  21st, 1869. There was a carter. He was driving a 5-horse truck along the bed of a dry creek. Down the gully shot a watery fist that was knuckled with boulders. A dead man, a truck, and 5 horses were punched into trees. New Orleans Daily Picayune, August 6, 1893. A woman in a carriage crossing a dried up stream in Rawlins County, Kansas. It was a quiet, summery scene. There was a rush of water. The carriage crumbled. There was a spill of crumbs that were a woman's hat and the heads of horses. Philadelphia Public Ledger, September 16, 1893. People asleep in the town of Villa Canas, Toledo, Spain. The town was raided by trees. Trees smashed through the walls of houses. People in bed were grabbed by roots. A deluge had fallen into a forest. Bright, clear day near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. From the sky swooped a wrath that incited a river. It was one bulk of water. 2 miles away, no rain fell. A raging river jeered against former confinement. Some of its gibes were freight cars. It scoffed with bridges. Having made a high-water mark of rebellion, it subsided into a petulance of jostling rowboats. Monastically, I have to accept that no line of demarcation can be drawn between emotions of minds and emotions of rivers. These sudden, astonishing leaks from the heavens are not understood. Meteorologists study them meteorologically. This seems logical and is therefore under suspicion. This is the fallacy of the sciences. Scientists are scientific. They are inorganically scientific. Someday they may be organic science, or the interpretation of all phenomenal things in terms of an organism that comprises all. If our existence is an organism in which all phenomena are continuous, dreams cannot be utterly different in the view of continuity from occurrences that are said to be real. Sometimes in a nightmare, a kitten turns into a dragon. Louth, Lincolnshire, England, May 29, 1920. The River Lud, which is only a brook and is known as Tennyson's Brook, was babbling, or maybe it was purling. Out of its play, this little thing humped itself 20 feet high. A ferocious transformation of a brook sprang upon the houses of Louth and mangled 50 of them. Later in the day, between banks upon which were piled the remains of houses in which were lying 22 bodies, and from which hundreds of the inhabitants had been driven homeless, the little brook was babbling or purling. Scientific publications early in the year 1880, an event was told of in the usual scientific way. That is, as if it were a thing in itself. It was said that a waterspout had burst upon the island of St. Kitts, BWI. A bulk of water had struck this island, splitting it into cracks, carrying away houses and people, drowning 250 of the inhabitants. A paw of water clawed with chasms had grabbed these people. In accordance with our general treatments, we think that there are waterspouts and cloudbursts, but the waterspout and cloudburst conveniences arise when nothing else can, or rather should, be thought of, and as labels are stuck on events that cannot be so classified except as a matter of scientific decorum and laziness. Some of the sleek, plump sciences are models of good behavior and inactivity because, with little else to do, they sit all day on the backs of patient fishmongers. As a monist, I think that there is something meteorological about us. Out of the libraries will come wraths of data, and we too shall jeer against former confinements. Our gibes will be events, and we shall scoff with catastrophes. The waterspout of St. Kitts, as if it were a single thing, unrelated to anything else. The West Indian, February 3rd, 1880. That, while the bulk that was called a waterspout was overwhelming St. Kitts, water was falling upon the island of Grenada, as it had never rained before in the history of the island. Grenada is 300 miles from St. Kitts. I take data of another occurrence from the Dominican, The People, published at Roseau, Dominica, BWI. About 11 o'clock morning of January 4th, the town of Roseau was bumped by a midnight. People in the streets were attacked by darkness. People in houses heard the smash of their windows. Out of there. Where was it? Panes. Night fell so heavily that it broke roofs. It was a daytime night of falling mud. With the mud came a deluge. The river Rosu rose, and there was a conflict. The river, armed with the detachables of an island, held up shields of mules and pierced the savage darkness with spears of goats. Long lines of these things it flung through the black streets of Rosu. In the Boiling Lakes district of Dominica, there had been an eruption of mud at the time of the deluge, which was like the fall of water upon St. Kitts 8 days later. There had, in recorded time, never been an eruption here before. 3 months before, there had been in another part of the West Indies a catastrophe like that of St. Kitts upon October 10th, 1879. A deluge fell upon the island of Jamaica and drowned 100 of the inhabitants. A flood that slid out from this island was surfaced with tangles of mahogany logs, trees, and bushes, brambled with the horns of goats and cattle, hung with a moss of the fleece of sheep. Incoming vessels plowed furrows as if in a passing cultivation of one of the rankest luxuriances that ever vegetated upon an ocean. Passengers looked at tangles of trees and bodies as if at picture puzzles. In foliage, they saw faces. For months, there had been in the provinces of Murcia and Alicante, Spain, a drought so severe that inhabitants had been driven into immigration to Algeria. Whether we think of this drought as the prayers of the people as having relation or not, there came a downpour that was as intense as the necessities. See London Times, October 20th, 1879. Upon October 14th, floods poured upon the parched provinces. Perhaps it was response to the prayers of the people. 5 villages were destroyed. 1,500 persons perished. Virtually in the same zone with Spain and the West Indies, a deluge fell in December. The river Cauca rose beyond all former high water marks so suddenly that people were trapped in their houses. This was upon December 19th. Excuse me. The next day, the earth started quaking in Salvador near Lake Penga. This lake was the crater of what was supposed to be an extinct volcano. I take data from the Panama Daily Star and Herald, February 10th, 1880. Upon the 31st of December, 4 days before occurrences in the island of Dominica, the earth quaked in Salvador, and from the middle of the lake Penga emerged a rocky formation. Water fell from the sky in bulks that gouged gullies. Gullies writhed in the quaking ground. The inhabitants who cried to the heavens prayed to epilepsy. Mud was falling upon the convulsions. A volcanic island was rising in Lake Penga, displacing the water, and streams that writhed from it violently. Rise of a form that filled the lake. It shook out black torrents, head of a gorgon, shaggy with snakes. Beginning upon October 10th and continuing until the occurrence at St. Kitts, deluge after deluge came down to one zone around this earth, or a flight of lakes was cast from a constellational reservoir, which was revolving and discharging around a zone of this earth. In the minds of most of us, this could not be. We have been taught to look up at the revolving stars and to see and to think that they do not revolve. Our data are of the slaughters of people who, by fishmongerish explanations, have been held back from an understanding of an irrational irrigational system, of their emotions, and of the elementary emotions of lands. Period. There's a hope in a mind, and it turns to despair. Or there's a fertile region in the materials of South American country, and an unsuspected volcano chars it to a woe of leafless trees, plains, and the promise of crops that are shining in sunlight. Plains crack into disappointments, into which fall expectations. An island appears in the ocean, and after a while, young palms feel upward. There's a convulsive relapse, a subliminal filth from the bottom of the ocean plasters the little aspirations. Quaking lands have classed their fields and have wrung their forests. Each catastrophe has been explained by the metaphysical scientists as a thing in itself. Scientists are contractions of metaphysicians in their local searches for completeness and in their statements that, except for infinitesimal errors, plus or minus completenesses have been found. I can accept that there may be superphenomenal completeness, but not that there can be phenomenal completeness. It may be that the widespread thought that there is God or allness is only an extension of the deceiving process by which an explanation of a swarm of ladybirds or to a fall of water at St. Kitts is given a guise of completeness. Or it may be the other way around, or that there is a wholeness, perhaps one of countless wholenesses in the cosmos, and that attempting completenesses and attempting concepts of completenesses are localizing consciousness of an all-inclusive state or being. So far as it is known, phenomena are concerned, that is complete. There have been showers of ponds from blue skies. There have been shafts of water, golden in sunshine. Reflections from stars have fluted sudden dark watery columns. There have been violent temples of water, colonnades of shafts revealed against darkness by lightning. Foaming facades as white as marble. Nights have been caves, roofs with vast fluent stalactites. These are sprinkles. March 1913. The meteorologists study meteorologically. The meteorologists were surprised. March 23rd, 1913. 250,000 persons driven from their homes. Torrents falling, rivers rising in Ohio. The floods of Dayton, Ohio were especially disastrous. Traffics of bodies in the watery streets of Dayton. The wind whistles and holds up a cab. They stop. Night and the running streets are hustling bodies, but coming is worse than the sights of former beings who never got anywhere in life and are still hurrying. The wreck of a trolley car speeds down an avenue. Down a side street rushes a dead man. Let him catch the car and he'll get about where all his lifetime he got catching other cars. A final dispatch from Dayton. Dayton in total darkness. March 23rd, 24th, and 25th. A watery sky that sat on the Adirondack Mountains began to slide. It ripped its slants on a peak, and the tops of lampposts disappeared in the streets of Troy and Albany. Literary event at Paterson, New Jersey. Something that was called a great cloudburst grabbed a factory chimney and on a ruled page of streets scrawled a messy message. With the guts of horses and other obscenities, it put in popularizing touches. The list of dead in Columbus, Ohio would probably reach 1,000. Connecticut River rising rapidly. Delaware River at Trenton, New Jersey, 14 feet above normal. March 26th in Parkersburg, West Virginia, people who called on their neighbors rode boats to second-story windows. If they had in their cellars what they have nowadays, there was much demand for divers. New lakes in Vermont and the state of Indiana was an inland sea. Farmers caught napping. Surprises everywhere. Napping everywhere. Wherever science was, there was a swipe at a sleep. Floods in Wisconsin, floods and destruction in Illinois and Missouri. March 27th, see the New York Tribune of the 28th that the Weather Bureau was issuing storm warnings. The professional wise men were not heard from before this deluge. Some of us would like to know what they had to say afterward. They said it in the Monthly Weather Review, April 1913. The story is told completely. The story is told as if there had been exceptional rains only in Ohio and 4 neighboring states. Reading this account, one thinks, as one should think, of considerable or of extraordinary rain in one small region, and of its derivation from other parts of this earth where unusual sunshine had brought about unusual evaporations. Canada, and it was not here that the sun was shining, waters falling and freezing. In Canada, loading trees and telegraph wires with ice, power houses flooded. In towns in darkness, crashes of trees heavy with ice. California was drenched, torrents falling in Washington and Oregon. Unprecedented snow in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Alabama deluged. Floods in Florida, Ohio, and 4 neighboring states. Downpours in France and in other parts of Europe. Spain. Seems that near Valencia, one of these nights there was a rotten theatrical performance. Such a fall of big hailstones that a train was stalled. Vast tragedian in a black cloak posing on the funnel of an engine, car windows that were footlights, and disapproval was expressing with the looks of millions of pigeons' eggs. Anyway, near Valencia, a fall of hail 3 feet deep stopped trains. Just where was all that sunshine? South Africa, moving pictures of the low degree of the now old-fashioned cereals, something stage clutching hands. There were watery grabs from the sky at Colesburg, Murraysburg, and Preiska. The volume of one of these bulks equaled 1/10 of the total rainfall in South Africa in 1 year. Snow 2 months before its season was falling in the Andes, floods in Paraguay, and people spreading in panics. Government vessels carrying supplies to homeless, starving people. River Uruguay rising rapidly. Heavy rains in the Fiji Islands. The rains of Tasmania during the month of March were 26 points above the average. Upon the first day of the floods in Ohio and 4 neighboring states, March 22nd, began a series of terrific thunderstorms in Australia. There was a rain blizzard in New South Wales and Queensland. All mails were delayed by floods. New Zealand. Wellington Evening Post, March 31st, the greatest disaster in the history of the colony. Where there had been sluggish rivers, bodies of countless sheep tossed in woolly furries. Maybe there is a vast old being named God, and reported strands of tossing sheep were glimpses of his whiskers in one of those wraths of his. In the towns, there were fantastic savageries. Wherever the floods had been before, it looks as if they had been to college. One of them rioted through the streets of Gore, having broken down store windows. It roistered with the bodies of animals, wrapped in lace curtains, silks, and ribbons. Down the Matura River sounded a torrent of terrible cries. It was a rush of drowning cattle. It was a delirium of brandishing horns upon which invisible collegians were blowing in fanfare. Ohio, and 4 neighboring states. The clip of Paraguay and the bob of New Zealand, the snip of South Africa, and the shearing of everything else that did not fit in with a theory. Whoever said that the pen is mightier than something else overlooked the mightiest of all, and that's the scissors. Wherever all this water was coming from, the full account is of North America and 4 neighboring continents. Peaches flying from orchards in the winds of New Zealand. Icicles clattering in the streets of Montreal. The dripping palms of Paraguay and the pine trees of Oregon were mounds of snow. At night, this earth was a black constellation sounding with panics. I can think of the origin of the ocean that fell upon it, not less the constellational terms, in not less than constellational terms. Perhaps Orion or Taurus went dry. If a place, say in China, greatly needs water, and if there be stores of water somewhere else in one organism, I can think of relations of requital as I think of need and response in any lesser organism or suborganism. Need of a camel, or storages and reliefs, hibernating bear, and supplies from his storages. All right, 756. At a meeting of the Royal Geographical Society, December 11th, 1922, Sir Francis Younghusband told of a drought in August 1906 in western China. The chief magistrate of Chongqing prayed for rain. He put more fervor into it. Then he prayed prodigiously for rain. It began to rain, then something that was called a water spout fell from the sky. Many of the inhabitants were drowned. In the organic sense, I conceive of people in forests and dwindling lakes all expressing a need and finally compelling an answer. By prayers, I mean utterances by parched mouths and also the rustlings of dried leaves and grasses. It seems that there have been responses. There are 2 explanations. One is that it is the mercy of God. For an opinion here, see the data. The other is that it is an organism that is maintaining itself. The British government has engineered magnificently for water supply in Egypt. I might have been better to plant persuasive trees and clergymen in Egypt, but clergymen are notoriously eloquent, and I think that preferable would be less excitable tipsters to God who could convey the idea of moderation. In one year, the fall of rain at Norfolk, England is about 29 inches. In Simmons' Meteorological Magazine, 1889, page 101, Mr. Simmons told of this fall of water of 29 inches in a year, and then told of volumes of water to depths of from 20 to 24 inches that had fallen from May 25th to the 28th, 1889. In South Wales, and of a greater deluge, 34 inches, that from the 29th to the 30th had devastated Hong Kong. Mr. Simmons called attention to these two bursts from the heavens thousands of miles apart, saying that they might or might not be a coincidence, but that he left it to others to theorize. I point out that a professional meteorologist thought the occurrence of only two deluges about the same time but far apart remarkable or difficult to explain in terms of terrestrial meteorology. It was left a long time to others. However, when I was due to appear, I appeared perhaps right on scheduled time, and I got Australian newspapers. The Sydney newspapers told of the soak in the New South Wales. I learned that all the rest of Australia was left to others, or was left waiting for me to appear right on scheduled time, most likely. Not rain, but columns of water fell near the town of Avoca, Victoria, and in the Melbourne Argus, the way of accounting for them was to say that a waterspout had burst here. There were wide floods in Tasmania. Fields turned to blanks that were then lumpy with rabbits. There had been a drought in Australia, and floods were a relief to a necessity, but the greater downpour in China interests us more in the conditions in China. It was a time of direst drought and extremest famine in China. Homeward Mail, June 4th, that in some of the more cannibalistic regions, sales of women and children were common. It is said to be almost impossible for anybody to devour his own child. Parents exchanged children. Down upon monstrous need came relief that was enormous. At Hong Kong, houses collapsed under a smash of alleviation. A fury of mercy tore up almost every street in the colony. The people had prayed for rain. They got it. Godness so loved Hong Kong that in the town's morgue it stretched out 16 of the inhabitants. At Canton, every pietist proclaimed the efficacy of prayer, and I think he was right about that. But the problem is to tone down all this I can't say that word. Efficacy. Yeah. If we will personify what I consider an organism, what he, or more likely she, has not is any conception of moderation. The rise of the river at Canton indicated that up country there had been catastrophic efficacy. I can't say that word. At Canton, he does it again. Efficacy. That's not it. Was so extreme that for months the people were rebuilding. Show me a starving man, I pay no attention. Show me the starving man, I can't be bothered. Show me the starving man on the point of dying, I grab up groceries and I jump on him. I cram bread down his mouth and stuff his eyes and ears with potatoes. I rip open his lips to hammer down more food and bung in his teeth, the better to stuff him. The explanation, it is the godlike in me. Now, in a library, we put in calls for the world's newspapers. Not a hint have we had that there is anything else. Nothing in scientific publications of the period, not another word from Mr. Simmons. But there is an implement that is mightier than the pen, and we're led on to one of our attempted correlations by our experiences with it. Germany. There was a drought so severe that there were public prayers for rain. Something that was called a waterspout fell from the sky, and people who did not get all the details went to church about it. Liverpool Echo, May 20th. 100 persons perished. At the same time, there were public rejoicings in Smyrna, where was staged another obsessive tragedy. Drought in Russia, Straits Times, June 6. Droughts ended by downpours in Bengal and Java. In Kashmir and in Punjab, violent thunderstorms and earthquakes occurred together. In Turkey, there would have been extremists' distress, but about the 1st of June, amidst a woe and thanksgiving, destructive salvations demonstrated efficacy. It's not efficacy either. Efficacy. And for a week kept on spreading joy and misery. Levant Herald, June 4th. Earthquakes preceded deluges and then continued with them. In conventional meteorology, no relation between droughts and exceptional rains is admitted. Our data are of widespread droughts and enormous flows of water. There are two little narrow strips of views on the margins of our moving pictures. On one side, that there is a beneficent God. On the other, that there isn't anything. And every one of us who has paid any attention to the annals of controversies knows that such oppositions usually give into an intermediacy. May 1889, widely this earth was in need, widely waters were coming from somewhere. Now, in organic terms, I am telling of what seems to me to be functional teleportation, or enormous manifestations of that which is sometimes, say in Oklahoma, a little drip over a tree. Volcanic eruptions upon this earth at times of deluges. And maybe in a land of the stars, there was an eruption in May 1889. In France, May 31st, there was one of the singularity lurid sunsets that are known as afterglows and that appear after volcanic eruptions. There was no known volcanic eruption upon this earth from which a discharge could have gone to the sky of France. It may have come from a volcanic eruption somewhere else. All suggestiveness is that it came to this earth over no such distance as millions of miles. Other discharges may be red rain coming down from the sky at Cardiff, Wales, red dust falling upon the island of Harris off the coast of France in the Mediterranean. See the Levant Herald, May 29th. St. Louis Globe Democrat, May 30th, an unknown substance that for several hours had fallen from the sky, crystalline particles, some pink and some white. Quebec Daily Mercury, May 25th, to find dust that had the appearance of a snowstorm falling in Dakota. Monstrous festivities in Greece, a land that was bedecked with assassinations. Its rivers were garlands, vast twists of vines budded with the bodies of cattle. The Malay states gulped the mines of Kamunting were suctions into which flowed floods. Ugh. The Bahama Islands were thirst, drought, and loss of crops, then huge swigs from the sky. Other West Indian islands went on gargantuan sprees, and I'll end up a prohibitionist. Orgies in Greece and more or less everywhere else, this earth went drunk on water. I've experimented, tried autosuggestion. You can get a pretty fair little souse from any faucet. Tangier, great suffering from the drought. Abundant rains about June 1st. Drought in British Honduras and heavy rains upon the 1st and 2nd of June. Tremendous downpours described in the newspaper published upon the island of St. Helena. Earthquake at Jackson, California. The next day, a gush from the sky broke down a dam. I'm on a spree myself. Library attendants wheeling me stacks of this Earth's newspapers. Island of Cyprus, a flop from the sky, and the river Pedius went up with a rush from which people at Nicosia narrowly escaped. Torrents in Celion, June 4th. A drought of many weeks broken by rains in Cuba. Drought in Mexico. And out of the heavens came a Jack the Ripper. Torn plantations and mutilated cities. Rise of the river at Huzutala. When it subsided, the streets were strewn with corpses. In England, Mr. Symonds expressed astonishment because there had been two deluges. Deluge and falls of lumps of ice throughout England, France deluged. Water dropped from the sky at Lausanne, Switzerland, flooding some of the streets 5 feet deep. It was not rain. There were falling columns of water from what was thought to be a water spout. The most striking of the statements is that bulks dropped. One of them was watched, or some kind of a vast vaporous cow sailed over a town, and people looked up at her bag of water. Something that was described as a large body of water was seen at Coburg, Ontario. It crossed the town holding its bag-like formation. 2 miles away, it dropped, it splashed rivers, and broke down all dams between Coburg and Lake Ontario. In the Toronto Globe, June 3rd, this falling bulk is called a waterspout. Fall of a similar bulk in Switzerland. Crops and houses and bridges mixing down a valley at Sargans. Fall of a bulk at Rickenbach, Saxony. It was a waterspout. This time, the fishmonger is a waterspout. Spain pounded by falling waters. Madrid flooded, many buildings damaged by a violent hailstorm. Deluges in China continue, and deluges in Australia continuing. Floods in Argentina. People of Ayacucho driven from their homes. Sudden rise of the river at Buenos Aires. In the South American Journal of this period are accounts of tremendous downpours and devastations in Brazil and Uruguay. One of these bodies of water that were not rain fell at Chetnall, Dorsetshire, England. The people, hearing crashes, looked up at the hill and saw it frilled with billows. Watery roughs from 8 to 10 feet high heaved on the hill. The village was tossed in a surf. The cause of this remarkable occurrence was for some time unknown, but it has now been ascertained that a waterspout burst on Battencombe Hill. So wrote Mr. Symonds, in whose brains there was no more consciousness of all that was going on in the world about him than there was in any other pair of scissors. It was not ascertained that a waterspout had burst at Batcombe Hill. No waterspout was seen. What was ascertained was that columns of water of unknown origin had fallen high on the hill, gouging holes, some of them 8 or 9 feet deep. Though Mr. Symonds gave the waterspout's explanation, it did not occur to him to note that there was no statement that the water was salty. These bulks of water and their pendant columns that they were waterspouts, or that slaughter had lain with life, and that the murderous mothers had slung off their udders, from which this earth drank through teats that were cataracts. Wherever the deluges were coming from, I note that as with phenomena of March 1913, unseasonable snow fell. Here it was about the 1st of June, and snow was falling in Michigan. The suggestion is that this was not a crystallization in the summer sky of Michigan, but an effect of the intenser coldness of outer regions upon water that had come to this earth from storages on a planet or from a reservoir in starland. Note back to mention of falls of lumps of ice in England. Wherever the deluges were coming from, meteors too were coming. If we can think that the falls of water and falls of the meteors were related, we have reinforcement to our expression that water was coming to this needful earth from somewhere else. 5 remarkable meteors are told of in the monthly Weather Review. In the New York Sun, May 30th, is an account of a meteor that exploded in the sky of Putnam County, Florida, and was heard 15 miles around. In Madras, India, where the drought was very grave, an extraordinary meteor was seen night of June 4th. In South Africa, where the drought was so extreme that a herd of buffaloes had been driven to a pool within 5 miles of the town, in Uitenhage, a meteor exploded with detonations that were heard in a line 40 miles long. May 22nd, great detonating meteor at Taranto, Italy. The meteor that was seen in England or Ireland, May 29th, is told of in Nature 40-174. For records of 3 other great meteors, see Nature and Cosmos. There was a spectacular occurrence in Dunedin, New Zealand, early in the morning of May 27th. Rumbling sounds, a shock, illumination of the sky, exploding meteor. Some parts of the United States, there had been extreme need for water. In the New Orleans Daily Picayune, are accounts of the gloomy outlook for crops in 6 of the southern states. About 20 reports upon this drought were published in the monthly Weather Review. Rushes of violent mercies, they flooded the south and smashed the north. Crash of a dam in Littleton, New Hampshire. Busted dam near Laurel, Pennsylvania. I think PA. May 1889 in Science of Religion. It is my expression that the two outstanding blessings, benefits, or gifts of God to humanity are science and religion. I deduce this, or that the annals of both are such trails of slaughter, deception, exploitation, and hypocrisy that they must be of enormous good to balance with their appalling evils, or the craze of medical science for the vermiform appendix that played out. Now everybody who can pay for it is losing his tonsils. Newspaper headings: family of 8 relieved of their tonsils. Save your pets, dogs and cats endangered by their tonsils. Concentrate in one place this bloody fad or scientific racket, and there would be a fury like that at Andover, New York in May 1889. A bulk of water, foaming as white as a surgeon, jabbed a bolt of lightning into Andover. It operated upon farms and cut off their inhabitants. Trained clouds stood around and handed out more bolts of lightning. A dam broke and a township writhed upon its field of operations. Another dam broke, but the operations were successes, and if there was much destruction, that was because of a complication of other causes. May 31st, Johnstown, PA. If I can't think of massacre apart from devotions, I think that a lake ran mad with religious mania. It rushed down a valley, and if I'm right about this, it bore on its crest the most appalling of all symbols, the mast of a ship that was crossed by a telegraph pole. In a pogrom against houses, it clubbed out their occupants with bridges. It impaled homes upon the steeples of churches. Its watery Cossacks, mounted on billows, flogged factories. And then, along the slopes of the Conemaugh Valley, it told its beads with strings of corpses. Earthwide droughts, prayers to many gods, something vouchsafed catastrophes. That from somewhere else in existence, vast volumes of water were sent to this arid earth or were organically teleported. Or that, by coincidence, an unseen waterspout after waterspout rose from the Atlantic and rose from the Pacific, from the Indian Ocean, the Southern Ocean, and from the Mediterranean, from the Gulf of Mexico, the English Channel, Lake Ontario, or that such an extension of such fishmongering is a brutalization of conveniences. Hold on. Or that from somewhere in a starry shell that is not enormously far away from this earth, more than a Mississippi streamed to this needful earth and forked the disasters of its beneficence from Australia to Canada. 15,000 persons were drowned at Johnstown. Chicago Tribune, June 10th, 1889. The people of Jonestown have lost all faith in Providence. Many have thrown away their Bibles and since the disaster have openly burned them. By the providential, I mean the organically provided for. By God, I mean an automatic Jehovah. All right, Chapter 24, Part 3. Emissions of arms, the bubbling of facts, at crevices, fire and smoke, and lava of naked beings. Out from a crater discharges of bare bodies boiled into fantastic formations. Or 5 o'clock, morning of December 28th, 1908, violent shocks in Sicily. The city of Messina fell in a heap which caught fire. It is the custom of Sicilians to sleep without night clothes, and from this crater of blazing wreckage came an eruption of naked beings. Thick clouds of them scudded into thin vapors. The earth quaked at Messina, and torrential rains fell. According to Nature, December 31st, 1908, a fall of meteorites had been reported in Spain a few days before the quake. According to the wise men of our more or less savage tribes, the deluge at Messina at the time of this quake fell only by coincidence. No wise men would mention the fall of meteorites as having any relation. There were at the time worldwide disturbances, or rather disturbances, along a zone of this earth: Asia Minor, Greece, Sicily, Spain, Canary Islands, Mexico. But all wise men who wrote upon this subject clipped off everything else and wrote that there had been a subsidence of land in Sicily. It is the same old local explanation. Scientists and priests are unlike in some respects, but they are about equally parochial. Yeah, I think that's the word. December 3rd, 1887, from a plinth of ruins, an obelisk of woes sounded to the sky. It was at Ragagneo, Italy. 900 houses were thrown down by an earthquake. The wail that went up from the ruins continued long before individual cries could be distinguished. Then the column of woe shattered into screams and prayers. The survivors said that they had seen fires in the heavens. In Cosmos NS 69-422, we are told that Professor Agamemnon had investigated these reported celestial blazes, but they were new lights upon old explanations. A blazing sky could have nothing to do with a local geological disturbance. The orthodox explanation was that a stratum of rocks had slipped. What could the slip of rocks have to do with sky fires? We were told that the professor had reduced all alleged witnesses of the blaze in the heavens to one who had told about it with little seriousness. What had suggested levity to him as to scenes of ruination and slaughter was not inquired into, but the story is recorded as a jest, and it may be all the more subtle because the fun of it is not obvious. Excuse me. About 6 a.m., February 23rd, 1887, at Genoa, Italy, burst a dam of conventional securities. There was a flood of human beings. An earthquake cast thousands of people into the streets. The sky was afire. It was a pour to get out of town. It was a rush in a glare. If at the time of the forest fire a dam should burst, thousands of logs leaping red in the glare would be like this torrent of human forms under a fiery sky. In other places along the Riviera, the quake was severe. In other places was made the statement that orthodox science will not admit, that the sky was afire. See Popular Science News 21-58. It will not be admitted, or it is said to be merely a coincidence. See L'Astronomie 1887, page 137, that at Apt Vaucluse a fiery appearance had been seen, and that then had come a great light, like a Bengal fire, without doubt. Coincidences. The 16th of August, 1906, and suddenly people living along the road of Valparaiso, Chile, lost sight of the city. There had come a terrible darkness. With it came an earthquake, the splitting of ground, and the roar of falling houses. Intensest darkness, and the voice in this chaos. It was a scream. People along the road heard it approaching. Chile lit up. Under a flaming sky, the people of Valparaiso were running from the smashing city, people as red as flames under the glare in the heavens, screaming and falling and leaping over the bodies of the fallen. An eruption of spurting forms that leaped and were extinguished. This reddened gush from Valparaiso, rising, falling shapes, brief faces, and momentary arms. It was like looking at the vast flames and imagining that spurts of them were really living beings. In Nature 90-550, it is said that 136 reports upon illuminations in the sky at Valparaiso had been examined by Count de Balor, the seismologist. At one stroke, he bobbed off 98 of them, saying that they were indefinite. He said that the remaining 38 reports were more or less explicit, but came from a region where at the time a deluge was falling. He clipped these too. For a wonder, there was an objection. A writer in the Scientific American 107-67 pointed out that de Ballor so dismissed the subject without inquiring into the possibility that the quake and the deluge were related. Had he admitted the possibility of relationship, dogma would have slipped upon dogma, and upon the face of this earth there would have been a subsidence of some ignorance. The lights that were seen in the sky, said de la Ballor, were very likely only searchlights from warships. The whole sky seemed afire. Scientific American 106-464, N. Simmons Meteorological Mag 41-226. William Gaw of Santiago, describing the blazing heavens, writes that it seemed as if the sober laws of physics had revolted. Or, says de Ballor, the people may have seen lights from tram cars. It does not matter how preposterous some of my own notions are going to seem. They cannot be more out of accordance with events upon this earth than is such an attribution of the blazing sky of a nation to searchlights or to lamps in tram cars. If I should write the stars are probably between 40 and 50 miles away, I'd be not much more of a trimmer of circumstances than is such a barber whose clips are said to be scientific. Maybe they are scientific, though mostly barbers are artists. Some of them do consider themselves scientific. Upon July 11th, 1856, the sun rose red in the Caucasus. See Lloyd's Weekly Newspaper, September 21st, 1856. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, at places where the sun was still shining red, there was an earthquake that destroyed 300 houses. There was another quake upon the 23rd of July. 2 days later, black water fell from the sky in Ireland. And what has any part of that to do with any other part of that? If a red-haired girl or a red shirt on a clothesline had been noted here, there would be, according to orthodox science, no more relation with earthquakes than there could be between a red sun and an earthquake. Black water falling in Ireland. Somebody spilling ink in Kansas. The moon turned green. For 2 observations upon a green moon that was seen at a place where an earthquake was going to occur, see The Englishman, July 14th and 21st, 1897. One of the observations was 6 days before, and the other 1 day before the quake of Assam, June 12, 1897. It was a time of drought and famine in India. The seismologist knows of no relation between a green moon or a red sun and an earthquake, but the volcanologist knows of many instances in which the moon and the sun have been so colored by the volcanic dusts and smokes that are known as dry fogs. The look is that dry fogs from a volcanic eruption came to the sky of India, one of them 6 days before and the other 1 day before a catastrophe. The mystery is this. If there had been a volcanic eruption somewhere else, why not volcanic appearances in Italy or Patagonia or California? Why at this place where an earthquake was going to occur? Coincidence. Upon the 11th of June in Upper Assam, where upon the 12th the center of the earthquake was going to be, torrents fell suddenly from the sky. A correspondent to The Englishman, July 14th, writes that this deluge was of a monstrousness that exceeded that of any other downpour that he had ever seen in Assam or anywhere else. At 5:15 p.m., 12th of June, there was a sight at Shillong that would be a marvel to the more innocent of the textbook writers. I tell so much of clipping and bobbing and shearing, but also there may be considerable innocence. Not a cloud in the sky, out of clear blue vacancy, dumped a lake. This drop of a bulk of water or transportation or teleportation of it was at the time of one of the most catastrophic of earthquakes centering farther north in Assam. This earthquake was a earth storm. Hills were waves and houses cast adrift were wrecked on them. Out into fields stormed people from villages, and long strings of them in white summer garments were lines of surf on the earth waves. Breakers of them spumed with infants In a human storm, billows of people crashed against islands of cattle. It is not only in meteorology that there are meteorological occurrences. The convulsions were so violent that there was scene shifting. The people recovered and looked around. It was a landscape. It was at landscapes changed as if a curtain had gone down, then up between acts of this drama. They saw fields, lakes, and roads that, in the lay of the land before the quake, had been hidden. It is not only in playhouses that there are theatrical performances, period. It is not exclusively anywhere where anything is, if ours is one organic existence in which all things are continuous. There were more delusions that will not fit into conventional explanations. Allahabad Pioneer, June 23rd, 1897, extremist droughts, the quake, enormous falls of water. There are data for thinking that somewhere there was a volcanic eruption. Another datum is that at Calcutta, after the earthquake, there was an afterglow. Afterglows are exceptional sunsets, sometimes of an auroral appearance, which are reflections of sunlight from volcanic dust high in the sky, continue to be seen an hour or so later than ordinary sunsets. Friend of India, June 15th. The entire west was a glory of deepest purple, and the colors did not fade out until an hour after darkness is usually complete. Something else that I note is that in many places in Assam, the ground was insipidly volcanic during the earthquake. Countless small craters appeared and threw out ashes. Considering the volcanic and the insipidly volcanic, I think of a relation between the catastrophe in Assam and the volcanic eruption somewhere else. But there is findable no record of a volcanic eruption upon this earth to which could be attributed effects that we have noted. I point out again that if there were a volcanic eruption in some part of our existence external to this earth or upon this earth, it would, unless a special relation be thought of, be as likely to cause an afterglow in England or South Africa as in India. The suggestion is that somewhere external to this earth, if in terrestrial terms there is no explanation, there was a volcanic eruption, and that the earthquake in India was a response to it, and that bulks of water and other discharges came from somewhere else exclusively to a part of this earth that was responsively or functionally quaking because a teleportive current of some kind, very likely electric, existed between the two centers of disturbances. Upon the 25th of June, dust fell from the sky near Calcutta. In the issue of this newspaper, July 14th, a meteorologist employed in the Calcutta Observatory described a most peculiar mist, like volcanic smoke, which had been seen in the earthquake regions. In his opinion, it was cosmic dust, or dust that had fallen to this earth from outer space. He said nothing of a possible relationship with the earthquakes. He would probably have called it mere coincidence. Then he told of a fall of mud upon the 27th of June at Thurgrain. There was a fall of mud in the Jessore district of Bengal, night of June 29th. Fell from a cloudless sky while the stars were shining. Suppose it were cosmic dust. Suppose, with the conventionalists, that this Earth is a swiftly moving planet that had overtaken a cloud of cosmic dust in outer space. In 1 minute, this Earth would be more than 1,000 miles away from this point of contact by orbital motion and would turn away axially. Yeah. But other falls of dust came upon India while the shocks were continuing, as if settling down from an eruption somewhere else to a world that was not speeding away orbitally and to a point that was not turning away by daily rotation. 5 days after the first fall of dust, a substance resembling mud fell at Gatal. For descriptions of just such a dry fog, as has often been seen in Italy after an eruption of Vesuvius, see the Madras Mail, July 5th, and the Friend of India, July 14th. Perpetual haze on the horizon all around, sky covered with thick layers of dust resembling a foggy atmosphere. About the 1st of July, mud fell at Hetamafor, according to the Friend of India, July 14th. I list these falls of dust and mud, but to them I do not give the importance that I give to the phenomenon that preceded this earthquake. I have come upon nobody's statement that they were of volcanic material, but it may be that there were other precipitations and that they were of a substance that is unknown upon this earth. In the Englishman, July 7th, a correspondent wrote that several days before, at Kurda, there had been a shower at night, and that the air became filled with the perfume of sandalwood. The next morning, everything was found covered with a colored matter which emitted the scent of sandalwood. About the same time, somebody else wrote to the Madras Mail, July 8th, that at Nadia there had been a fall from the sky of a substance more or less resembling the sandal used by natives in worshipping their gods. The moon turns green before an earthquake. Torrential rains precede an earthquake. We have only begun listing phenomena that appears before catastrophes. They are interpretable as warnings clipped from events by barbershop science. There was an investigation of phenomena in Assam. It was scientific in the sense that the tonsorial may be the scientific. Dr. Oldham enormously reduced the catastrophe to manageable dimensions. He lathered it with the soap of his explanations and shaved it clean of all unconventional details. This treatment of next two catastrophes is as satisfactorily beautifying to neat little minds as are some of the Marcel waves that astronomers have ironed into tousled circumstances. For a review of Dr. Oldham's report, see Nature 62-305. There's no mention of anything that was seen in the sky, nor anything that fell from the sky, nor of occurrences anywhere else. Dr. Charles Davison, in a study of recent earthquakes, gives 57 pages to his account of this catastrophe, and he, too, mentions nothing that was seen in the sky or that fell from the sky. He mentions no simultaneous phenomena anywhere else. It is a neat and well-trimmed account, but there's a smell that I identify as too much bay rum. Simultaneous phenomena that always are left out of a conventionalist account of an earthquake, one of the most violent convulsions ever known in Mexico, while the ground in India was quaking. There was a glare in the sky, and the Mexicans thought that the glare was volcanic. If so, no active volcano in Mexico could be found. Deluges fell upon this quaking land, one of the falls of water upon a Mexican town, drowning some of the inhabitants, is told of in the San Francisco Chronicle, June 17th. In all this part of our job, our position is not so much denial of data as assertions that the occurrences in which we see relationship were only coincidences. If I ever accept any such explanation, I shall be driven into extending it to everything. We'll have a theory that in our existence there is nothing but coincidence, and, according to my experience with theorists, we'll develop this theory somewhat reasonably. Chemical reactions, supposed to be well known and accounted for, do not invariably work out as, according to formula, they should work out. Failures are attributed to impurities in chemicals, but perhaps it is only by persistent coincidence, like that of glares so often occurring at times of earthquakes, that water appears when oxygen and hydrogen unite. Meteors frequently fall to this earth during earthquakes, but that may be only by coincidence, just as offsprings so often appear after marriage, indicating nothing exclusively of relationships, inasmuch as we have heard of cases of alleged independent reproduction. Let the feminists become only a little more fanatical, and they will probably publish lists of instances of female independence. It is either that or our data are not of coincidences, or that everything's a coincidence. As to some deluges at times of earthquakes, there is no assertion of coincidence, and there is no mystery. There's an earthquake, and water falls from the sky. Then it is learned that a volcano, one of this Earth's volcanoes, had been in eruption, and that, responsively to it, the earth had quaked, and that volumes of water, some of them black and some of them not discolored, had been discharged by this volcano, falling in bulks or falling in torrential rains upon the quaking ground. Sometimes the sky darkens during earthquakes, and there is no assertion of coincidence, and there is no mystery. Upon March 11th, 1875, for instance, a vast black cloud appeared at Guadalajara, Mexico. There was an earthquake. See La Scientifique 1876-322. In this instance, the darkened sky at the time of the earthquake was explained because it was learned that both phenomena were effects of an eruption of the volcanic Cocorococo. Cabaracoco. Yes, there have been unmysterious showers of meteors or of fireballs that looked like meteors at times of earthquakes. There were eruptions upon this earth. The fireballs or meteors came from them. There were especially spectacular showers of volcanic bombs that looked like meteors or that were meteors during the eruption in Java, August 1883, New Zealand, June 1886, West Indies, May 1902. But our data are of such phenomena in the sky during earthquakes at times when no terrestrial volcano that could have had such effects was active. So far, we have not correlated with anything that could be considered a volcanic eruption anywhere in regions external to this Earth. Now, we are called upon not only for data seemingly of volcanic eruptions in a nearby starry shell around this Earth, but for data that may be regarded as observations upon celestial volcanoes in action. Hey, shut this off. All right, chapter 25, page 773. With a surf and a glare, this earthquake to picture, or in the monistic sense, there was in Peru a catastrophe that was a hideous and magnificent emotion. It is likely that there's a wound in the brain at a time of intensest excitement, red of the writhing earth and red of the heaving ocean, and in between a crimson gash of surf slashed from Ecuador to Chile, or so was visualized the rage by super introspection. According to the midgets of orthodoxy, such a picture cannot be accepted. See the little Deb Balor school of criticism, but quakes that were pictures by a very independent artistry. Snow that was white on the peaks of mountains, cataclysm, peaks struck off, avalanches of snow glaring red, gushing in jugular spouts from the decapitations, glints from the fiery sky upon land and sea, tossing houses and ships, were spangles, forests lashed with whips of fire from which shot out sparks that were birds and running animals. August 13th, 1868, people in Peru rushing from their falling houses, stumbling in violations of streets, seeing the heavens of fire, crying, El Vulcan. Away back in the year 1868, scientific impudence had not let loose, and there was no scientific clown to laugh off a blazing sky. With the story of lights in horse cars, the mystery of this occurrence is in the belief in Peru that there was, somewhere at this time, a volcanic eruption. Cities were flung in the sea. The sea rushed back upon ruins. It doubled all ordinary catastrophes by piling the wrecks of ships upon the ruins of houses. Fields poured over cliffs into the Bay of Arica. It was a cataract of meadows. We have gone far in our demonstration of continuity, which has led from showers of frogs to storms of meadows. Vast volumes of water fell from the sky. It was appalling providence. This water was needed. The waters soaked into the needful earth, and surplus beneficences made new rivers. In the streams there was a ghastly frou-frou of torrents of corpses, and the coast of Peru was filled with fluttering bodies. Almost ultimate evil could be stimulated by such a lingerie? Yeah. These furbelows of dead men flounced in the waves were the drapery of Providence. Upon August 19th, there was another violent quake, and again there was a glare in the sky. Both times there was no accounting for such a spectacle except by thinking that there had been an eruption in Peru. According to the New York Herald, September 29th, the volcano Macuacua was suspected. London Times, October 21st. Letter from someone who had seen the flaming sky and had heard that Candarave was the volcano. It was said that the eruption had been at Aqualonga, and then it had not been Aqualonga, but Cayambe. An illumination in the sky lasting several hours is described in Comptes Rendus 67-1066, and here a writer gives his opinion that the volcano was Sajama. Other observers of the glare said that it came from Cotopaxi, Cosmos NS 3-3-367. It was supposed that Cotocachi was the volcano. It is not possible to find anything of this disagreement in any textbook. All agree upon attributing to one volcano. It was Mount Misty. New York Herald, October 30th, 1868, that Mount Misty had not been active. See Comptes Rendus 69-262, the results of M. Gay's investigations that in this period, not one of the suspected volcanoes had been active. See the student 4-147. Sometimes volcanic eruptions upon this earth shine at a distance like stars. It will be my acceptance that new stars are new volcanic eruption in starland. For a description of a terrestrial eruption that shone like a star, see the American Journal Science 2-144. See a description in the New York Times, September 23rd, 1872, of an eruption of Mauna Loa, which far away looked star-like. At 12:30 p.m., September 4th, appearing something that has often been seen at Naples when Vesuvius has discharged. It was like the volcanic discharge that we have noted at Guadalajara, Mexico. A dense mountain-like cloud appeared in the western sky at Calu, Peru. The earth heaved with violence equal to that of August 13th. New York Tribune, October 7th, that in the southwestern sky was seen a star. It is my expression that this was the star that broke Peru. Night of February 4th, 1872, another glare in the sky that the constellation Orion was afire, that a tragedy upon this earth began in the sky, which a spectacle that excited peoples of this earth from Norway to South Africa, but that underlying tragedies written by human beings or rotten sky and land are the same conventions, and that organic drama is no more likely to let catastrophe come without preceding phenomena that may be interpreted as warnings than would stagecraft of this earth permit final calamity without indications of its approach. That a surprise was preceded by a warning that was perhaps of the magnitude of a burning of all the forests of North America. Testimony of the sun and the moon to coming destruction. Announcements that were issued in blazes, showers of gleaming proclamations, brilliant and long-enduring advertisement. But that mind upon this earth was brutalized with dogmas, and that the scientific wise men, stupefied by a creed, presided over a slaughter, or were surprised when came the long and brilliantly advertised. This night of February 4th, 1872, ablaze in the constellation Orion. From centers of alarm upon this earth, there was telegraphing. City called upon city. People thought that neighboring community was burning. In the West Indies, island called upon island. In each island, the glare in the sky was thought to come from a volcanic eruption in some other island. At Montcalare, Italy, an earthquake, or a response in this earth to cataclysm somewhere else, was recorded by seismographs. There may have been special relation with the ground in Italy. With this glare, which was considered auroral because there was no other way of conventionally explaining it, though auroras never have been satisfactorily explained, came meteors. Denza recorded them as seen in Italy, and noting the seeming relation to the glare, explained that the seeming relation was only a coincidence. That's got to be thought by everybody who opposes all that this book stands for. If it was not a coincidence, the meteors came to this earth from wherever the glare was. If the glare was in the constellation Orion, Orion may be no farther from Italy than is San Francisco. Upon the night of February 22nd, another glare was seen in the sky, and by coincidence, it was identical in all respects except magnitude with the glare of the fourth. By coincidence, again, meteors appeared. See Comptes Rendus 74-641. 5 days after the second seeming eruption in Orion, dust fell from the sky at Cosenza, Italy. The meteors that were seen at the time of the first glare were extraordinary. They appeared only in the zone of Italy. As seen with the glare in India, they are told of in the Allahabad Pioneer Mail, February 12th, and the Bombay Gazette, February 19th. See other records of ours of zone phenomena. 16 days after the second glare in Orion, reddish-yellow dust fell from Sicily and continued to fall the second day and fell in Italy. Trembling trillions, or a panic of immensities, and the twinkles of the stars are the winks of proximities, and our data are squeezing supposed remoteness into familiarities, because if from a constellational eruption dust drifted to this earth in a few weeks, it did not drift trillions of miles. But was this dust a discharge from a volcano? It was volcanic dust, according to Professor Silvestri. See the journal Chem Soc, London 25-1083. Professor Silvestri thought that it must have come from an eruption somewhere in South America, but my notes upon phenomena of this year, 1872, are especially numerous, and I have no record of any eruption in South America or anywhere else upon this earth to which could be attributed this discharge. Excuse me. For records of a stream of events that then started flowing, see Comptes Rendus, Volume 74, 75, and Les Mondes, Volume 28. In Italy, upon the 1st of April, began successions of auroral lights and volleys of meteors. Night of April 7th and 8th, many meteors at Mondovi, Italy. Solar and lunar halos, which may or may not be attributed to the presence of volcanic dusts, were seen in Italy. April 6th, 7th, and 8th. 2 days later, Vesuvius became active, but there were only minor eruptions. There was an uneasiness in Italy, but it was cold in Naples that the wise men were watching Vesuvius. Because of the slight eruptions, some of the peasants on the slopes began to move. These were a few of the untrustful ones. The others believed when the wise men said that there was no reason for alarm. Night after night, while this volcano in Italy was rumbling, meteors came to the skies of Italy. There is no findable record that they came so anywhere else. They came down to this one part of this earth as if this earth were stationary. April 19th, the third arrival of dust, volumes of dust of unknown origin, fell from the sky in Italy. There was alarm. The sounds of Vesuvius were louder, but a quiet fall of dust, if from the unknown, spreads an alarm of its own. The wise men continued to study Vesuvius. They paid no more attention to arrivals of dusts and meteors in the sky of a land where a volcano was rumbling than to arrivals of songbirds or of tourists in Italy. Their assurances that there was no reason for alarm, founded only upon their local observations, held back upon the slopes of the volcano all but a few disbelievers. The 20th of April, eruption of Vesuvius, convolutions of clouds, scrimmages of brains that have broken out of an underground academy of giants trying to think for themselves, struggling to free themselves from subterranean repressions. But clouds and brains are of an underlying oneness. Struggles soon relapsed into a general fogginess, volcanic or cerebral, the products of obscurities. Naples was in darkness. The people of Naples groped in the streets, each in a hellish geometry of his own, each seeing in a circle a few yards in diameter and hearing in one dominant roar no minor sounds more than a few yards away. Streams of refugees were stumbling into the streets of Naples. People groped in circles into which were thrust hands holding up images or clutching loot. Fragments of sounds in the one dominant roar, geometrically in bewilderment, or circles in a fog, and something dominant and everything else crippled. The flitting of feet, shoulders, bandaged heads, cries to the saints, profanity of somebody who didn't give a damn for Vesuvius, legs of a corpse carried by invisible prayers to God, and jokers screeching false alarms that the lava was coming. A blast from the volcano cleared away smoke and fog. High on Vesuvius, a zigzag streak of fire. It was a stream of lava that looked fixed in the sky. With ceaseless thunder, it shone like lightning, a bolt that was pinned to a mountain. Glares that were followed by darkness and an avalanche of bounding rocks and stumbling people no fugitive knew, one passing bulk from another, crashing rocks and screaming women going by in silence in the one dominant roar of the volcano. When it was dark, there were showers of fire, and then in the glares came down dark falls of burning cinders. In brilliant illuminations, black rains burned the running peasants. Give me the sting of such an ink, and they'd be running. Somewhere in the smoke and flames on the mountainside fell a sparrow. According to conventional theologians, this was noted. The next day, there was another flow down the slopes of Vesuvius. It was of carts that were laden with bodies. Possibly this was overlooked if attention was upon the sparrow. See data to come for a more matured opinion. In at least one mind or quasi-mind or whatever we think are minds upon this earth, there was awareness of more than coincidence between flows of meteors in Italy and a volcanic eruption in Italy. In Comptes Rendus 741183, M. Silberman tells of the meteors in Italy and the eruption of Vesuvius and gives his opinion that there was relation. It was a past generation's momentary suspicion. The record is brief. There was no discussion. To this day, no conventional scientist will admit that there is relation. But if there is also another relation. That is between his dogmas and the slaughters of people. In orthodox terms of a moving earth crossing orbits of meteor streams to which any one part of this earth, such as the Italian part, could have no especial exposure to meteors so moving, there is no explanation of the repeated arrivals of meteors, especially or exclusively in Italy, except this, night after night after night. Coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. Our unorthodox expression is that it was because this earth is stationary. According to the data that have been disregarded about 60 years, it may be that there was a teleportive or electrolytic current between a volcano of this earth and a stellar volcano. If we think that a volcano in a land that we call the constellation Orion interacted with a volcano in Italy as Vesuvius and Etna often interact, there must be new thoughts upon the distance of Orion. The one point that every orthodox astronomer would contest or deride, because its acceptance would be followed by acceptance of this book as a whole, is that the glare that seemed to be in Orion was in Orion. These are the data for thinking that the glare that seemed to be in Orion was in Orion, which cannot be vastly far away. The glare in the sky early in the evening of February 4th, 1872, was west of Orion, as if cast by reflections from an eruption below the horizon. But when Orion appeared in the east, the glare was in Orion, and it remained in Orion. At Paris, all beams of light came from Orion after 8 p.m. In England, in Orion. In South Africa, the point from which all beams diverged was in Orion. An account by Professor A.C. Twining of observations in the United States is published in the American Journal of Science 3-3-273. This remarkable fact, as Professor Twining calls it, but without attempting to explain, is noted that from 7:15 in the evening until 10:15, though Orion had moved 1/8 its whole revolution, the light remained in Orion. There is no conventional explanation to oppose us. My expression is that the glare so remained in Orion because it was in Orion. Anybody who thinks that the glare was somewhere between this Earth and the constellation will have to account not only for the fixedness of it in a moving constellation, but for its absence of parallax as seen in places as far apart as South Africa and the United States. All right, chapter 26, horses erect in a blizzard of frogs and the patter of worms on umbrellas, the hum of ladybirds in England, the twang of a swarm of Americans at Templemore, Ireland. The appearance of Cagliostro, the appearance of Professor Einstein's theories. A policeman dumps a wild man into a sack, and there is alarm upon the continents of this earth because of the blaze in a constellation. That all are related because all are phenomena of one organic existence, just as upon August 26, 1883, diverse occurrences were related because all were reactions to something in common. August 26, 1883, people in Texas excitedly discussing a supposed war in Mexico. Young men in Victoria, Australia, watching a snowstorm. The first time in their lives, crowds of Chinamen hammering on gongs, staggering sailors in a vessel off the Cape of Good Hope. I have data for thinking that somewhere beyond this earth and not enormously far away, there was, before these occurrences, an eruption. About August 10th of this year, 1883, at various places appeared afterglows that cannot be traced to terrestrial eruptions. Upon the 13th of August, an afterglow was reported from Indiana, and 10 days later from California. Upon the 21st, 22nd, afterglows appeared in South Africa. There was no known eruption upon this earth by which to explain these atmospheric effects, but there was a disturbance upon this earth, and the circumstances were similar to those in Italy in April 1872. The volcano Krakatoa in Java was in a state of minor activity. It was not considered alarming. Upon the 25th of August, a correspondent to the Perth Inquirer, see Nature, 29388, was traveling far inland in Western Australia. He was astonished to see ashes falling from the sky, continuing to fall all afternoon. If this material came from regions external to this earth, it came down hour after hour as if to a point upon a stationary earth. An attempt to explain was that there may have been an eruption in some little-known part of Australia. In Australian newspapers, there is no mention of an eruption in Australia at this time, and in my own records, there is only one instance, and that one doubtful, of an eruption in Australia at any time. I am not here including New Zealand. There was at this time no eruption in New Zealand. Krakatoa was in a state of minor activity. Wise men from Latvia, localizing like the wise men of Vesuvius in April 1872, were studying only Krakatoa, considering as a thing in itself out of relation with anything else. Conditions here were not alarming. The natives were told that there was no danger, and natives, Columbia University, or East Side, West Side, New York City, or Java, believe what the wise men tell them. April 19th, 1872, the dust of unknown origin that fell from the sky, preceded by one day the eruption of Vesuvius. August 25th, 1883, the ashes of unknown origin that fell from the sky. August 26th, Krakatoa exploded. It was one of this world's biggest noises, and surrounding mountains doffed their summits. Or, like a graduating class at Annapolis, they fired off their peaks, which came down as new reefs in the ocean. The bombs that shot out were like meteors. The mountain was a stationary meteor, radiant, and shot out Krakatoids. Had the winds gone upward, the new meteor stream would have been also of houses and cattle and people. The explosion shattered shores so that all charts were useless. Krakatoa paused. Early in the morning of the 27th, the Straits of Sunda went up. The units of its slaughters were villages. 95 villages went up in waves that were 90 feet high, 100 feet high, 120 feet high. From the 95 villages, tens of thousands of humans were recruited, and they went dead into warring confusions. In the gigantic waves, armies of the dead were flung upon each other. There was no more knowledge of what it was all about than in many other battles. Charges of dead men rushed down the waves and were knocked into rabbles by regiments spouting up from the bottom. Onslaughts of corpses, and in the midst of them appeared green fields that were the tops of palm trees. Raiders in thousands dashed over momentary meadows, and there were stampedes that were as senseless as the charges. Stone clouds were rolling over the conflict. Furies of dead men were calming under bulks of pumice, and slimy palm trees were protruding. The waves were going down under pressures of pumice 20 feet deep in places. Battlefields on the land have, after a while, turned quiet with graveyards. But change in the Straits of Sundra was the quickest of mortuary transitions. The waves were pressed flat by pumice. There was a gray slab of stone over the remains of the people of 95 villages. Black palms, heavy with slime, drooped on each side of this long gray slab. The volcanic dust, the sun was dim, so that unseasonable coldness followed. In places in Victoria, Australia, where 25 years' snow had not been seen, snow fell. I'd like to have this especially noted, that at places far away, the volcanic bombs were mistaken for meteors, or they were meteors, on account of volcanic bombs from Krakatoa, which looked like shooting stars as seen from a vessel about 90 miles from the volcano. It is published in the Cape Times, October 3rd, 1883, at Fukchou, China. The glare in the sky was like an aurora borealis. For this record, which is important to us, see the Rept Krakatoa Committee, Royal Society, page 269. People in Texas heard sounds as if of a battle. Off the Cape of Good Hope, vessels lurched in waves from the catastrophe. It is my expression that the explosion of Krakatoa was stimulated by, or was a reaction to, an eruption in the land of stars that is not enormously far away. Afterglows that were seen after August 26th were attributed to Krakatoa. That the preceding afterglows and the fall of ashes were of materials that drifted to this earth from an eruption somewhere else, passing over a distance that cannot be considered vast in a few weeks or a few days. And that the light of a volcanic eruption somewhere in the sky was seen by people of this earth. See the Perth Inquirer, October 3rd. A correspondent tells of several observations early in September upon a brilliant light that had been seen in the sky near the sun. There was a beam of light from it, and the observers thought that it was a comet. This appearance is described as conspicuous. If so, it was seen at no observatory in Australia. The circumstance that no professional astronomer in Australia saw this brilliant light brings up in any normally respectful mind doubt that there was such a light. But this appearance in the sky is the central datum of our expression, and I am going to make acceptable that even though it was reported only by amateurs, there was at this time a conspicuous new appearance in the heavens. New Zealand. Silence in the observatories, but reports from amateurs upon a very large light in the sky. See the New Zealand Times, September 20th, 1883, that a yarn in Australia could quickly spread to New Zealand. Ceylon, an unknown light that was seen in the sky of Ceylon about a week after the eruption of Krakatoa. Straits Times, October 13th, an appearance like a comet in the sky at Samarang, where the natives and the Chinese were terrified and burned incense for protection from it. England, observation upon the night of August 28th by Captain Noble, a well-known amateur astronomer. Whatever the professionals of Australia and New Zealand were doing, the professionals of England were doing likewise. If doing nothing is about the same, whatever it's done. In Knowledge 4-173, Captain Noble tells of a sight in the heavens that he describes as like a new and most glorious comet. An amateur in Liverpool saw it. Knowledge 4-207, an object that looked like the planet Jupiter with a beam from it. However, one professional astronomer did report something. Professor Swift at Rochester, New York, saw nights of September 11th and 13th an object that was supposed by him to be a comet. But if so, it was not seen again. There was a beam of light from this object, so it was thought to be a comet. See coming data upon beams of light that have associated with new stars. The first observation upon a new light in the sky was 2 nights after the explosion of Krakatoa. It may have been shining, conspicuous, but unseen at the time of the eruption. The matter of the supposed velocity of light or the hustle of visibility comes up in the mind of a conventionalist, but If in the past scientists have determined the velocity of light to be whatever suited their theories, I feel free for any new view that I consider suitable. Look it up and find that once upon a time the alleged velocity of light agreed with supposed distances in this supposed solar system, and that when change theories required changes in these distances, the velocity of light was cut down to to agree with the new supposed distances. In the kindergarten of science, the more or less intellectual infants who have made these experiments have prattled anything that the childlike astronomers have wanted them to prattle. A conventionalist would say that, even if there were a new star at a time of terrestrial catastrophe, light of it would not be seen upon this earth until years later. My expression is that so close to this earth are the stars that when a new star appears or erupts, effects of it are observable upon this earth, and that, whether because of closeness or because there is no velocity of light, it is seen immediately or is seeable immediately if amateurs happen to be looking. Upon the night of August 6, 1885, while all the professional astronomers of this earth were attending to whatever may be professional astronomical duties, a clergyman made an astronomical discovery. The Reverend S.H. Saxby looked up at a new star in the nebula of Andromeda, and he saw it. There is much of uppishness to anybody who says or announces that of all cults, his cult is the aristocrat, but most of his upward looking is likely to be at the supposed altitude of himself. All over this earth, professional astronomers were looking up at themselves. In England and Ireland, 3 amateurs, besides the Reverend S.H. Saxby, being probably of only ordinary conceit, looked up beyond themselves and saw the new star. For the record, see the English mechanic of this period. Whatever the professional astronomers of the United States were looking up at, they saw nothing new. But somebody in the USA did see the new star. Sidereal Messenger 4-246, an amateur in Red Wing, Minnesota. It was not until August 31st the upness in an observatory related to the stars. Finally, a professional astronomer either looked up or woke up, or waking up, looked up, and looking up, woke up. The whole nebula of Andromeda shone with the light of the new star. Several observers thought that the newly illuminated nebula was a comet. From the light of the new star, the whole formation lighted up like a little West Indian island at a time of an eruption in it. According to conventionalists, this nebula is 60 times 60 times 24 times 365 times 8 times 8, 186,000 miles in diameter, and light from a new star central in it would occupy 4 years in traversing the whole. But as if because this nebula may not be so much as 6 times 186,000 inches in diameter, no appreciable time was occupied and the whole formation lighted up at once. Other indications, whatever we think we mean by indications, that the nebula of Andromeda is close to this earth, Sweden, and it was reported that wild fowl began to migrate at the earliest date, August 16th, ever recorded in Sweden. Flap of a wild duck's wings and the twinkles of a star, the star and the bird stammered a little story that may someday be vibrated by motors oscillating back and forth from Vega to Canopus. So the birds began to fly. It was because of unseasonable coldness in Sweden. Unseasonable coldness is a phenomenon of this Earth's volcanic eruptions. It is attributed to the shutting off of sunlight by volcanic dusts. The temperature was lower in Sweden than ever before recorded in the middle of August. Upon August 31st, the new star reached maximum brilliance, and upon this date the temperature was the lowest that it had ever been known to be in the last of August in Scotland. All very well, except the unusual coldness may be explained in various ways having nothing to do with volcanoes. See Nature 32-466, 625. That 9 days after the first observation upon the new star in Andromeda, an afterglow was seen in Sweden. There is no findable record of a volcanic eruption upon this earth to which this phenomenon could be attributed. September 3rd, 5th, 6th afterglows appeared in England. These effects continued to be seen in Sweden until the middle of September. I don't know whether these data are enough to jolt our whole existence into a new epoch or not. From what I know of the velocity of thought, I should say not. All right, page 786. If a volcanic discharge did drift from Andromeda to Sweden, it came from a northern constellation to a northern part of this earth, as if to a part of this earth that is nearest to a northern constellation. But if Andromeda were trillions of miles away, no part of this earth could be appreciably nearer than any other part to the constellation. If repeating afterglows in Sweden were phenomena of repeating arrivals of dust from outer space, they so repeated in the sky of one part of this earth because this earth is stationary. I note that I have overlooked the new star of Cygnus late in the year of 1876. Perhaps it is because the star was discovered by a professional astronomer that I neglected it. However, I shall have material for some malicious comments. Upon the night of November 24th, 1876, Dr. Schmidt of the Athens Observatory saw in the constellation Cygnus a new star. It was about a third magnitude and increased to about a second. Over all the observatories of this earth, this new star was shining magnificently, but it was not until December 9th that any other astronomer saw it. It was seen in England upon the 9th because upon the 9th, news reached England of Dr. Schmidt's discovery. I note the matter of possible overclouding of the sky in all other parts of this earth at this time. I note that between the dates November 24th and December 9th, there were 8 favorable nights in England. It so happens that I have recorded of what one English astronomer was doing in this period. Upon the night of November 25th, he was looking up at the sky. Meteoric observations are conventionalities. New stars are unconventionalities. See Nature, December 21st, 1876. This night, this astronomer observed meteors. There was a volcanic eruption in the Philippines upon the 26th of November. About 2 weeks later, a red rain fell in Italy. There is considerable in this book that is in line with the teachings of the most primitive theology. We have noted how agreeable I am sometimes to the most Southern Methodists. It is that scientific orthodoxy of today has brutally or mechanically or unintelligently reacted sheerly against all beliefs of the preceding or theological orthodoxy and has reacted too far. All reactions react too far. Then a reaction against this reaction must, of course, favor or restore some of the beliefs of the earlier orthodoxy. Often, before disasters upon this earth, there have been appearances that were interpretable as warnings. But if a godness places kindly lights in the sky, also it is spreading upon the minds of this earth a darkness of scientists. This is about the beneficence of issuing warnings and also seeing to it that the warnings shall not be heeded. This may not be idiocy, it may be divine plan, that surplus populations shall be murdered. In less pious terms, we may call this maintenance of equilibrium. If surplusages of people upon this earth should reduce, and if then it should, in the organic sense, becomes desirable that people in disaster zones should live longer or die more lingeringly, provided for them are phenomena of a study of warnings, a study that is now, or that has been, subject to inhibitions. August 31st, 1886. Just before the sun dropped behind the horizon, it was eclipsed by a mass of inky black clouds. People noticed this appearance. It was like the dense mountain-like cloud that appeared at Callao, Peru, before the earthquake of September 4th, 1868. But these people were in a North American city. Meteors were seen. They were like the fireballs that have shot from this earth's volcanoes. Luminous clouds, such as have been seen at times of this earth's eruptions, appeared, and people watched them. There was no thought of danger. There was a glare, more meteors. The city of Charleston
Charleston, South Carolina, was smashed. People running from their houses, telegraph poles falling around them. They were meshed in coils of wires. Street lamps and lights in houses waved above like lights of a fishing fleet that had cast out nets. It was a catch of bodies, but that was because minds had been meshed in the net of a cult woven out of the impudence of the de Belors and the silences of the Davisons, spread to this day upon every school of this earth. The ground went on quaking. Down from the unknown came perhaps a volcanic discharge upon this quaking ground. Whether it was volcanic dust or not, it is said in the New York World, September 4th, that volcanic dust was falling at Wilmington, North Carolina. September 5th, a severe shock at Charleston, and a few minutes later came a brilliant meteor which left a long train of fire. At the same time, 2 brilliant meteors were seen at Columbia, South Carolina. See almost any newspaper of the time. I happen to take from the London Times, September 7th. There was another discharge from the unknown, or a strange cloud appeared upon the 8th of September off the coast of South Carolina. The cloud hung heavy in the sky and was thought to be from burning grass on one of the islands. Charleston News and Courier, September 10th, that such was the explanation, but that no grass was known to be burning. If a procession starts at Washington Square, New York City, and if soldiers arrive in Harlem and then keep on arriving in Harlem, I explained that in spite of all the eccentricities of Harlem, Harlem is neither flying away from the procession nor turning on 125th Street for an axis. Meteors kept on coming to Charleston. They kept on arriving at this quaking part of this Earth's surface as if at a point on a stationary body. The most extraordinary display was upon the night of October 22nd. There was a severe quake at Charleston while these meteors were falling. About 50 appeared about midnight, October 23rd and 24th. A meteor exploded over Atlanta, Georgia, casting a light so intense that small objects on the ground were visible. A large meteor at Charleston, night of October 24th. An extraordinary meteor at Charleston, night of the 28th, is described in the News and Courier of the 29th as a strange celestial visitor. It was only a coincidence. There is no conventional seismologist and there is no orthodox astronomer who says otherwise. In The Friend of India, June 22, 1897, is another record of some of the meteors that were seen in Charleston, that, at the time of the Great Quake, Professor Oswald saw meteor after meteor shoot from an apparent radiant near Leo. Carl McKinley, in his descriptive narrative of the earthquake of August 31, 1886, records a report from Cape Romaine Light Station upon an unusual fall of meteors during the night. Again, a volcanic discharge came to this point, or a fall of ashes was reported. In the News and Courier, November 20th, it is said, what do you say? It is said that about 10 days before, ashes had fallen from the sky at Summersville, South Carolina. It is said that the material was undoubtedly ashes. Then it is said that it had been discovered that upon the day of this occurrence, there had been an extensive forest fire near Summersville. Monthly Weather Review, October and November 1886. Under forest and prairie fires, there is no mention of a forest fire, either small or extensive, in either North or South Carolina. Somerville, and not Charleston, was the center of the disturbances. Ashes came from somewhere exactly to this central point. In a study of recent earthquakes, Dr. Charles Davison gives 36 pages to an account of phenomena at Charleston. He studies neither meteors nor anything else that was seen in the sky. He studiously avoids all other occurrences upon this earth at this time, refines such a study to a finality of omissions, and the vacancy of the imbecile is the ideal of the student. I approve this as harmless. The other occurrences were enormous. Destruction in South Carolina was small compared with a catastrophe in Greece. Upon the day of the first slight shock at Charleston, there was a violent quake in Greece at And at the same time, torrents poured from the sky in Turkey, carrying away houses and cattle and bridges. Thousands of houses collapsed and hundreds of persons perished. This day there was a shock at Srinagar, Kashmir, shocks in Italy and Malta, and increased activity of Vesuvius. Just such an inky cloud as was seen at Charleston was seen in the eastern Mediterranean at the time of the catastrophe in Greece, reported by the captain of the steamship La Valette. See Malta Standard, September 2nd. A mass of thick black smoke changing into a reddish color. The sea was perfectly calm at the time. In the sky of Greece, there was a glare like the light of a volcanic eruption. I confess to a childish liking for making little designs or arrangements of data myself, and every formal design depends upon blanks as much as upon occupied spaces. But my objection to such a pattern maker as Dr. Davison is to the preponderance of what he leaves out. In Dr. Davidson's 36 pages upon the lesser catastrophe at Charleston, he spins thin lines of argument in a pretty pattern of agreements around omissions. It is his convention that all earthquakes are of local subterranean origin. So he leaves out all appearances in the sky and mentions none of the other violences that disturbed a zone around this earth. It is a monstrous disproportion when a mind that should be designing embroidery takes catastrophes for the lines and blanks of its compositions. It is my expression that if a clipper of data should dislay his scissors, or should accidentally let in an account of one of the many localized repetitions of meteors, he would tell of an indication that this earth is, or is almost, stationary. Night of the October 20th, meteors falling at Srinagar, Kashmir. There was an earthquake. Shocks and falls of meteors continued together. According to my searches in Indian newspaper, these repeating meteors were seen nowhere else. As to zone phenomena, I point out that there is a difference of only 1 degree of latitude between Charleston and Srinagar. For the data, see the Times of India, November 5th. If a string of meteors should be flying towards this earth, and if the first of them should fall to this earth at Srinagar, how is anybody going to think of the rest of them falling exactly here if this earth is speeding away from them? Sometimes I am almost inclined to have a little faith, of course not in general reasoning, but anyway in my own reasoning, and I go on to observe that a long string of meteors can be thought of as coming down to the one point where the first fell, if that point is not moving away from them. But I begin to suspect that the trouble with me is that I am simple-minded, and that mine enemies, whom I call conventionalists, are more subtle than I am and prefer their views because mine are so obvious. Of course, this earth is stationary in a surrounding of revolving stars so far away that an expedition could sail to them. But no dilectation of any fastidiousness would be attracted by a subject so easy to maintain. Back to the data. Geysers spouted from the ground at Charleston, and there were sulfurous emissions. The ground was insipidly volcanic and charged electrically. Meteors and smoky discharges and glares and falls of ashes and enormous pours of water as if from a volcano that was moving around a zone of this earth. And there is no knowing when in the year 1886 disturbances began in the constellation Andromeda. In the observatory 9-402, it is said that upon September 26th, a new star in the Andromeda Nebula had been reported by one astronomer, but that, according to another astronomer, there was no such new star. Astronomical Register 1886-269, that upon October 3rd, a new star in this nebula had been photographed. I think of our existence as a battery, an enormous battery, or in the cosmic sense, a little battery. So I think of volcanic regions, or incipently volcanic regions, in a land of the stars and in a land of this earth as electrodes, which are mutually perturbative, and between which flow quantities of water and other volcanic discharges in electrolytic or electrically temportative occurrence. According to data, I think that some teleportations are instantaneous and that some are slow drifts. To illustrate what I mean by stimulation, most likely electric by interacting volcanoes and transportation or electric teleportation of matter between mutually effective volcanoes, I shall report a conversation which, unlike mere human dialogue, was seen as well as heard. Upon the evening of September 3rd, 1902, at Martinique, where the volcano Mount Pelée humps high, Professor Anglo Hilbrun, as he tells in his book Mount Pelée, saw southward at sea, electric flashes. They were in the direction of La Soufrière, the volcano upon the island of St. Vincent, 90 miles away. La Soufrière was flashing. Then Pelée answered. Pelée hugely answered in tones befitting greater magnitude. A dozen flickers in the southern sky, and then Pelée speaking up with a blinding electric opinion. The little female volcano, or anyway the volcano with the feminine name, nagged and was then answered with a roar. This bickering kept up a long time. About 5 o'clock, morning of the 4th, there was another appearance upon the southern horizon. It was a dense bulk of smoke from La Soufrière. It drifted slowly. It went directly to Pelée and massed about Pelée. There's no use arguing with a little female volcano. She casts out obscurations, but there may be enormous use for this occurrence regarded as data. All right, Chapter 27. Once upon a time, one of this Earth's earlier scientists pronounced or enunciated or told a story which was somewhat reasonable of a flood and of all the animals of this Earth saved as species in a big boat. Perhaps the story was not meant seriously by its author, but was a satire upon the ambitious boat builders of his day. It is probable that all religions are founded upon ancient jokes and hoaxes, but considering the relative fewness of the animals that were known to the scientists or the satirists of that early time, this story was as plausible as the science or as the best satire of any time. However, data of such a host of animals piled up that the story of the big boat lost its plausibility. Note that our data are upon events of which the founders of the present so-called science of astronomy knew little or knew nothing. Orthodox astronomy has been systematized without considering new stars, their phenomena, and indications. It is a big boat story. Once upon a time, it was plausible. It is in the position of the orthodox geology of former times when a doctrine was formulated without consideration for fossils and sedimentary rocks. But when fossils and sedimentary rocks were incorporated, they forced a radical readjustment. New stars were not taken into the so-called science of astronomy by the builders of that system because no astronomer ever saw or reported a new star between the years 1670 and 1848. Presumably, new stars have not started appearing all at once in modern times. Presumably, in this period of 178 years, many new stars appeared and were not seen, though we shall have data for thinking that some of them shone night after night with the brilliance of first magnitude. One would like to know when time after time the sky was probably spectacular with a new light the astronomers were doing in these 178 years. We may be able to answer that question if we can find out what the astronomers are doing now. There is not agreement among the wise men. Virtually there is, by the wise men of our tribes, no explanation of new stars. The collision theory is heard of most, always, provided there have been little boys and other amateurs to inform them. The wise ones tell of stars that have collided. They have never told of stars that are going to collide. Why is a story always of stars that have collided? Assuming now that, instead of being points in a revolving shell, stars are swiftly moving bodies, there must be instances of stars that are going to collide some days, weeks, or years from any given time. It is too much to assume that only dark stars collide, or the preponderance of dark stars would be so great that the sky would be black with inky waves. So far, we have not a fair impression of how frequently new stars appear. It will be said that stars that are so close to each other that in a year or so they will collide have, because of their enormous distance from the Earth, the appearance of one point of light. This takes us to one of the solemnest and laughablest of the wise men's extravagances. It is their statement that after two stars have collided, they can, by means of the spectroscope, pick out in what is to the telescope only one point of light. The fragments of an alleged collision, the velocities, and the directions of these parts. If any spectroscopist can do this thing that the reading public is told that he can do, never mind about parts where he says there has been a collision, but let him pick out a point in the sky which is of parts that are going to collide. Let him tell where a new star is going to be, otherwise let him go on being told by amateurs where a new star is. New stars appear. There are disturbances upon this earth. There are volcanic appearances in the sky, volumes of smoke and dust rolled down upon this earth, and the meaning of it all may someday be skyward ho, storms upon a constellation's vacant areas of Poles and Russians. A black cloud appears in the sky of Lyra, and downpours a deluge of Italians. Drifting sands of Scandinavians sift down to a star. January 5th, 1892, just such a fiery blast has often torn down the slopes of Vesuvius, shot across the state of Georgia. Was a black tornado filled with fire. About this time, there were shocks in Italy, and in the evening, people in many parts of New York State were looking up and wondering at a glare in the sky. The next day, they had something else to wonder about. There were shocks in New York State upon the 8th, dust that was perhaps volcanic, but that had probably been discharged from no volcano of this earth, fell from the sky in northern Indiana. 14th. Tidal wave in the Atlantic and a shock at Memphis, Tennessee. Snow fell in Mobile, Alabama, where there had been only 4 falls of snow in 70 years. Floods in New England, quakes in Japan, 15th, 16th, 17th. At this time began the eruption of Tongariro, New Zealand. Tidal wave or seismic wave in Lake Michigan upon the 18th. For references, see the New York newspapers. The Philadelphia Public Ledger, January 27th, reported a fall from the sky of a mass of fire into a town of Massachusetts upon the 20th. At this time, Rome, Italy, was quaking. Shocks in France. 2 days later, shocks in Italy and Sicily. January 24th, a great meteor with thunderous detonations shot over Cape Colony, South Africa. A drought at Durango, Mexico, was broken by rain, the first to fall in 4 years. Upon the night of the 26th, there was a glare in the sky that alarmed people throughout Germany. Severest shock ever known in Tasmania upon the 27th, and shocks in many places in Victoria, Australia. In the night sky of England, people watched a luminous cloud. There was a new star. In all the observatories of this earth, not a professional astronomer had observed anything out of the ordinary. But in Edinburgh, a man who knew nothing of astronomical technicalities looked up at the sky and saw the new star night of February 1st. Throughout this period of the glares and the shocks and the seeming volcanic discharges, a new star or a new celestial volcano had been shining in the constellation Auriga. The amateur, Dr. Anderson, told the professionals. They examined photographs and learned that they had been photographing the new star since December 1st. The look of data is that volcanic dust drifted from a new star to the sky of this earth in Indiana in not more than 39 days. For 4 hours upon the 8th of January, dust came down from the sky in northern Indiana, and if it did come from regions external to this earth, it came settling down hour after hour as if to a point upon a stationary earth. I have searched in many scientific periodicals and in newspapers of all continents, finding record of no volcanic eruption upon this earth by which to explain. La Nature 41-206 that this dust had been analyzed and had been identified as of volcanic origin. Science 21-303 that this dust had been analyzed and had been identified as not of volcanic origin. Monthly Weather Review, January 1892. It was in all probability a probability of volcanic origin. I have records of 5 other new stars, which from December 21st, 1896 to August 10th, 1899 appeared at times of disturbances upon this earth, times of deluges, and of volcanic discharges that cannot be attributed to terrestrial volcanoes. 2 of the discoveries were made by amateurs. The other discoveries were made by professionals who, with nothing at all resembling celerity, learned by examining photographic plates that new stars that had been looked at by astronomers had been recorded by cameras. The period of one of these incelerities was 11 years. See Nature 85-248. Star after star has appeared as a minute point or as a magnificent sight in the heavens, and the professional astronomers have been unobservatory. They have been notified by amateurs. We shall have records of youngsters who have seen what they were not observing. The first of the brightest infants of whom I have record is Seth Chandler of Boston. I have it that anybody who is only 19 years old, or for that matter 29, is a youngster. Seth was 19 years old. Upon May 12, 1866, an amateur astronomer named Brigham at Tuam, Ireland, notified the professional astronomers who were looking somewhere else that there was a new star in the constellation Corona Borealis. In the United States, the professional astronomers were busily engaged looking in other directions. Upon the night of the 14th, Seth Chandler interrupted their observations, telling them that there was something to look at. For any pessimist who is interested in what becomes of exceptionally bright boys and the disappointing records of many of them, I note that when this bright youngster grew up, he became a professional astronomer. What on earth, or pretty nearly assuredly unrelated to the skies, were the professionals doing? February 1901, night of February 22nd, and Dr. Anderson, the amateur who had discovered Nova Auriga 9 years before, looked up at the constellation Perseus, and even though he had probably been befoozling himself with astronomical technicalities ever since, saw something new, and knew the new when he saw it. It was a magnificent new star. It was a splendor that scintillated over stupidity. Not a professional at any of this Earth's observatories knew of this spectacle until informed by Dr. Anderson. Usually it is said that Dr. Anderson discovered this star, but his claim has been contested. In Russia, it was recorded that 9 hours earlier, at a time when the sleepiest of observatories had not yet closed down or had not yet quite not observing, the new star had been discovered by Andreas Borisak of Kiev. Andreas was a schoolboy. Before the discovery of this new star in Perseus, or Nova Persei, there had been appearances like volcanic phenomena unattributable, however, to any volcano of this earth. I keep saying volcano. It's volcano. Upon the morning of February 13th, deep greenish-yellow clouds spreading intensest darkness appeared in France. Upon the 16th, a black substance fell from the sky in Michigan. There was the extreme coldness that often results from interferences with sunlight by volcanic dust. At Naples, 3 persons were found to have frozen to death night of the 13th. A red substance fell with snow near Mildenhall. It may have been functionally transmitted organic matter. Pigeons seem to feed upon it. I have data for thinking that at least 4 nights before Dr. Anderson's observation, this new star, or a beam from it, though unseen at all observatories, was magnificently visible. I think so because upon the night of the 18th, somebody in Finchley, London, and somebody in Tooting, London, saw something that they thought was a comet. Upon the night of the 20th, somebody in Tottenham saw it. A story of 3 somebodies who had seen something that was missed by all this Earth's professional astronomers would not be worth much if told after an announcement of a discovery, but these observations were told of in the London Daily Mail, published upon the morning of February 22nd, before Dr. Anderson was heard from. 16 days after the Anderson observation, dust arrived upon this Earth, or it fell from the sky in volumes that were proportional to this outburst of first magnitude in the heavens. The new star at its brightest was of the magnitude of Vega, dust of the redness of many volcanic dusts, and of no African deserts that one hears anything of. And if African deserts ever are red, moving picture directors who are strong for realism, or rather sometimes are, should hear about this, fell from the sky. It came down upon the 9th and 10th of March in Sicily, Tunis, Italy, Germany, and Russia. A thick orange-red stain was reported from Ongar, Essex, England upon the 12th. The standardized explanation was published. I shall oppose it with heresy. Throughout this book, I say that all expressions of mine are only mental phenomena and sometimes may be rather awful specimens, even at that. But if we examine our opposition and find it wanting, and if my own expression includes much that it left out, my own expression is not wanting, whether it's wanted or not. Two wise men wrote the standardized explanation. The red dust had come from an African desert. See Nature 66-41. They wrote that they had traced this dust to a hurricane in an African desert, pointing out that upon the first day it had fallen in Tunis that looked like a first fall near an African desert. But the meteorologists are not banded like the astronomers for a record of a fall not so near an alleged African desert. See Simmons Met Mag 1902-25. While this dust was falling in Tunis, also it was falling in Russia. That this dust did come to this earth from outer space, see the Chemical News 83-159. Dr. Phillipson's opinion that it was meteoric. That may be accepted as the same as volcanic. My own expression. That a hurricane that could have strewn Europe with dust from the Mediterranean to Denmark and from England to Russia could have been no breeze fluttering obscurely in some African desert, but a devastating force that would have fanned all northern Africa into taking notice. Lagos, Gold Coast, record, March, April 1901, no mention of a whirlwind of any kind in Africa. In the Egyptian Gazette, Alexandria, there is nothing relating to atmospheric disturbances. There is nothing upon any such subject noted in the Sierra Leone News. Al-Maghreb, Tangier, reports the falls of dust in Europe, but mentions no raising of dust anywhere in Africa. But there was a new star. Hold on. I'll keep going. The standardized explanation is perforated with omissions. It seems unthinkable that mind upon this earth could be so bound down to this earth by this thing of gaps until we reflect that so are all nets fabricated. In Austria, while this dust was falling, the earth quaked. What could such an occurrence have to do with dust from an African desert? Omitted. But at the time of this quake, something else was seen, and it may have been a volcanic bomb that had been shot from a star. London Daily Mail, March 13th. A great meteor was seen, dust falling in Tunis. And that was told. More of the omitted. See the Levant Herald, March 11th, that while the dust was falling in Tunis, there were violent earthquakes in Algeria. Something else that was left out. See the English Mechanic, 73-96, and the Bolsock Astro de France, April 1901. That upon March 12th, ashes fell from the sky at Avellino, Italy. Vesuvius, April 1872. Krakatoa, August 1883. Charleston, August 1886. Time after time. And now May 1902. In the hollow of their ignorance, two of these conventionalists held 30,000 lives. May 1902. There was another surprise. It, too, was preceded by announcements that were published by mountains and were advertised in columns of fire upon pages of clouds. In April and May 1902, across the zone of this earth, also outside the zone, there were disturbances. More than earth-wide relations are indicated to start with. Eruptions of Mount Pelée. Martinique began upon April 20th, the date of the Lyrids. However, in this book, I am omitting many data upon a seeming relation between dates of meteor streams and catastrophes. Then the volcano, La Soufriere, island of St. Vincent, BWI, broke out. Upon the day of an earthquake in Siberia, April 12th, mud fell from the sky in widely separated places in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. See Science NS 15-872. There may have been an eruption in some other part of one relatively small existence or organism. There may have been a new star. In the English Mechanic 75-291, a correspondent in South Africa told that in the constellation Gemini, night of April 16th, he had seen an appearance like a new red star. He thought that it might have been not a star, but a mirage of the red light of the Cape Town lighthouse. The white houses of St. Pierre, Martinique, a white city, spread up on the slopes of Mount Pelée. Early in May, there were panics in St. Pierre. Pelée was convulsed, and the quavering city of St. Pierre shook out inhabitants. Desertion of the city was objected to by its rulers, and the governor of the island called upon two wise men, Professor Lands and Professor Doze, for an authoritative opinion. They had studied the works of Dr. Davison. There were shocks in Spain and in France. La Soufriere was of continuing violence. A volcano broke out in Mexico. Quakes in the Fiji Islands. Violent quake in Iceland. Volcanic eruption at Cook's Inlet, Alaska. Professor Lands and Professor Doze were studying Mount Pelée, an eruption of cattle and houses and human beings in Rangoon, Burma, or the most terrible storm remembered. A remarkable meteor was seen at Calcutta in Java. The Ruang volcano broke out. There were rumblings of an extinct volcano in France, in Guatemala, with terrific electrical displays. Enormous volumes of water fell upon earthquakes. Professor Doze and Lance announced that there was in Pelé's activity nothing to warrant the flight of the people. See Heldprin, Monte Pelé, page 71. Governor Motet ordered a cordon of soldiers to form around the city and to permit nobody to leave. Upon the 7th of May, a sky in France turned black with warning. See back. Two other such coincidences with catastrophes. Soot and water like ink fell from the sky at Parc Saint-Marc. Upon this day, the people of St. Pierre were terrified by the blast from Pelée. No inhabitant of the city was permitted to leave, but as recorded by Helprin, the captain of the steamship Orsolina did break away. They tried to hold him. The pronouncement was read to him. The officialdom threatened him, but with half a cargo, he broke away. His arrival at Havre is told of in the Daily Messenger, Paris, June 22nd. The authorities of the port of St. Pierre had refused to give him clearance papers, but terrified by the blast from the volcano, he had sailed without them. The people of St. Pierre were trying to escape, but they were bound to the town by chains of soldiers. Even in discreetly worded accounts, we read of these people running in droves in the streets, in storms of ashes turned black at all outskirts by the soldiers. They were running in whirlpools. Not one word of retreat nor of any modification came from the two professors. They had spoken in accordance with the dogmas of their deadly cult. Considered locally, an effusion of ashes was not considered alarming, and no relationship with wider disturbances could be admitted. The professors had spoken, and the people of St. Pierre were held to the town. The people were hammered and stabbed back, or they were reasoned with and persuaded to stay. Just how it was done, one has to visualize for oneself. It was done. At night, there was a lull. Then blasts came from the volcano. Screaming people ran from the houses. The narrow streets of this little white city were dark with people massing one way only to gather against the military confines, sweeping some other way only to be turned back by soldiers. Had there been darkness, some of them might have escaped, but even at sea, the glare from the volcano was so intense that the crew of a passing steamship, Lord Antrim, were almost blinded. As seen from the sea, the streets hung up on the mountainside, distorted by smoke and glare, fluttered along narrow crowds, darkening these fluttering streets. Folds of white garments of a writhing being chained, awaiting burning. Upon the morning of the 8th, the city of St. Pierre was bound to the stake of Mount Pelée. There was a rush of flames in the volcanic fires that burned the city. 30,000 people perished. All right, Chapter 28. Early in October 1902, vast volumes of smoke of unknown origin obscured all things at sea and made navigation difficult and dangerous from the Philippines to Hong Kong and from the Philippines to Australia. I do not know of anything of terrestrial origin that, with equal density, ever has had such widespread effects. Vesuvius has never been known to smoke up the whole Mediterranean. Compared with this obscuration, smoke at the distance from Krakatoa in August 1883 was only a haze. For an account, see the Journal Royal Meteorological Society 30-285, Hong Kong Telegraph, October 25th, that a volcanic eruption in Sumatra had been reported. Science, NS 23-193, that there had been no known eruption in Sumatra. That perhaps there had been enormous forest fires in Borneo and Sumatra. Sarawak, Borneo. Gazette, October-November 1902. No record of any such fires. There came something that was perhaps not faster, but that was more substantial. If a story of a sandstorm in a desert is dramatic, here is a story of a continent that went melodramatic. Upon the 12th of November, upon all Australia, except Queensland, dust and mud fell from the sky. Then densest darkness lit up with glares. Fires were falling from the sky. Sometimes there are abortive embryos that are mixtures, an eye looking out from ribs, other features scattered. Fires and dust and darkness, mud that was falling from the sky. Australia was a womb that was misconceiving. A fireball burst over a mound which flickered, and frightened sheep ran from it, or, reflecting glares in the sky, a breast leered and stuck out a long red mob of animals. A furrowed field or ribs in a haze, and a star from the embers of a bushfire. An avenue of trees heavy with mud sagging upon a road that was pulsing with carts, or black lips far from jaws closing soggily upon an umbilical cord in vainly attempted suicide. Fireballs started up fires in every district in Victoria. They fell into cities and set fire to houses. At Witchproof, the whole air seemed on fire all day of the 12th, and the next day dust, mostly red dust, sifted down upon Australia, falling upon the 13th, and Queensland too. Smoke rolled in upon northern Australia upon the 14th. The substance that fell from it was said to be ashes. One of the descriptions is of a light, fluffy gray material. How many of those who have a notion that they're pretty well read have ever heard of this discharge upon Australia? And what are the pretty well read but the pretty well led? Little of this tremendous occurrence has been told in publications that are said to be scientific, and I take from the Australian newspapers, but accounts of some of their fireballs that fell from the sky were published in Nature, volume 67. There are reports from about 50 darkened, stifled towns in the Sydney Herald of the 14th. Business suspended. Nothing like it before in the history of the colony. People stumbling around the lanterns. Traffics were gropes. Mail coaches reached Sydney 9 hours late. Ashes with a sulphurous odor fell in New Zealand upon the 13th. The cities into which fell balls of fire that burned houses were Burt, Allendale, Delaquin, Langdale, and Chiltern. Smoke appeared in Java and the earth quaked. A meteorite fell at Kamsagar, India. Upon this day of the 12th, a disastrous deluge started falling in the Malay states. Along one river, 7 bridges were carried away. There was no investigation. However, passing awareness did glimmer in one mind in England. In a dispatch to the newspapers, December 7, 1902, Sir Norman Lockyer called attention to the similarity between the dust of the fireballs in Australia and the dust and the fireballs from volcanoes in the West Indies in May of this year. Our own expression depends upon whether all this can be attributed to any eruption upon this earth or not. The smoke in October cannot be so explained, but was there any particular volcanic activity upon this earth about November 12, 1902? The most violent eruption of Kilauea, Hawaii in 20 years was occurring, having started upon the 10th of November. There was a geyser of fire from the volcano Santa Maria in Guatemala, having started upon October 26th. About the 6th of November, Colima in Mexico began to discharge dense volumes of smoke. The volcano Salivili in Samoa broke out upon the 13th, having been active, though to no great degree, upon October 30th. According to a dispatch dated November 14th, there was an eruption in the Windward Islands, West Indies. Stromboli burst into eruption upon the 13th. About this time, Mount Colapata in Peru broke out. With the smoke that appeared with an earthquake in Java was the spans of an ocean and a continent far away. New Zealand is near all these volcanoes except Stromboli, then is Australia, but dust and ashes fell a day later in New Zealand. Fireballs fell enormously in Australia. Not one was reported in New Zealand. Nothing appeared between New Zealand and these volcanoes but dense clouds of smoke between Australia and the Philippines. Delayed vessels until at least November 20th. So we regard the unexplained smoke of October and November as continuous with the discharges of November 12th and relate both as emanations from one source, which is undiscoverable upon this earth. There was a new star, Popular Astronomy 3060, that in October 1902, a new star appeared in the southern constellation Puppis. Upon the 19th of November, a seismic wave 6 feet high crashed upon the coast of South Australia. Upon this day, the new star shone at its maximum of 7th magnitude. See our expression upon phenomena of August 1885. If in November 1902 a volcanic discharge came to Australia from a southern constellation, it came as if from a star region to the nearest Earth region. But if constellations be trillions of miles away, no part of this Earth could be appreciably nearer than any other part to any star. So extraordinary was terrestrial volcanic activity at this time that it will have to be considered. Like other expressions, our expression here is that mutually effective outbursts spread from the land of the stars to and through the land of this earth, firing off volcanoes in the disturbances of one organic or relatively little whole. It was a time of extremist drought in Australia. Thunderstorms that came after November 12th were described as terrific. As a glimmer of awareness, Lockyer told of the fireballs that came with the dust to Australia, and the suggestion to him was that there had been a volcanic discharge. But there was something that he did not tell. He did not know. It was told of in no scientific publication, and it reached no newspaper published outside Australia. After the first volley of fireballs, other fireballs came to Australia. I have searched in newspapers of all continents, and it is my statement that no such fireballs were reported anywhere else. All were so characterized that it will be accounted that all were of one stream. Perhaps they came from an eruption in the constellation Puppis, but my especial expression is that if all were of one origin, and if, days apart, they came to this earth only to Australia, they so localized, because this earth is stationary. For references, see the Sydney Herald and the Melbourne Leader. There was a meteoric explosion at Parramatta, November 13th. A fireball fell and exploded terrifically at Karkor. At Murrumbumbura, north-southwest, dust and a large fireball fell upon the 18th. A fireball passed over the town of Nyngan, night of the 22nd, intensely illuminating sky and ground. Upon the night of the 20th, as reported by Sir Charles Todd of the Adelaide Observatory, a large fireball was seen, moving so slowly that it was watched for minutes. At 11 o'clock, night of the 21st, a fireball of the apparent size of the sun was seen at Toetita. An hour later, several towns were illuminated by a great fireball. Upon the 23rd, a fireball exploded at Ipswich, Queensland. It is of especial importance to note the record of one of those bombs or meteors that moved so slowly that it was watched for minutes. Excuse me. From February 12th to March 1st, 1903, dusts and discolored rains fell along the western coasts of Africa upon many parts of the European continent and in England. The conventional explanation was published. There had been a whirlwind in Africa. I have plotted for more than 20 years in the libraries of New York and London. There are millions of persons who would think this a dreary existence, but the challenges, the excitements, the fines, any pronouncement by any orthodoxy is to me the same as handcuffs. It's brain cuffs. There are times when I don't give a damn whether the stars are trillions of miles away or tens of miles away, but at any time, let anybody say to me, authoritatively or with an air of finality, that the stars are trillions of miles away or tens of miles away, and my contrariness stirs or inflames, and if I can't pick the lock of his pronouncements, I'll have to squirm out some way to save my egotism. So then the dusts of February and March 1903 and the whirlwind explanation, and other egotists will understand how I suffer. Simply say to me, mere dust from an African desert, and I begin to squirm like an Houdini. February 12th to March 1st, 1903, dust from an African desert. I get busy. Nature 75589, that some of this dust which had fallen at Cardiff, Wales, had been analyzed and that it was probably volcanic. But the word analyzed is an affront to my bigotries, conventional chemist, orthodox procedures, scientific delusions, more coercions. I am pleased with a find in the London Standard, February 26, 1903. It is of no service to me, especially now, but in general it is agreeable to my malices, a letter from Professor T.G. Bonney, in which the professor says that the dust was not volcanic because there was no glassy material in it. And a letter from somewhere else stating that the specimens of the dust that were examined by him, all the particles were glassy. It was dust from an African desert, but I have resources. One of them is Al-Maghreb. How many persons beside myself have ever heard of Al-Maghreb? Al-Maghreb is my own discovery. The dust came down in England, Austria, Switzerland, Belgium, Germany, and along the west coast of Africa. Here's the question. If there had been an African hurricane so violent as to strew a good part of Europe, is it not likely that there would have been awareness of it in Africa? Al-Maghreb, Tangier, no mention of any atmospheric disturbance that would bear out the conventional explanation. Lagos, Weekly Record, Sierra Leone, Weekly News, Egyptian Gazette, no mention. And then one of those finds that make plotting in libraries as exciting as prospecting for nuggets. February 14th of this year, one of the most extraordinary phenomena in the history of Australia. In magnitude, it was next to the occurrences of the preceding November. In the blackest of darkness, dust and mud fell from the sky. Melbourne Age, February 16th, 3 columns of reports upon darkness and dust and falling mud in about 40 widespread towns in New South Wales and Victoria. The material that fell in Australia fell about as enormously as fell the dusts in Europe. There is no mention of it in any of the dozens of articles by conventionalists upon the phenomena in Europe. It started falling 2 days after the first fall of dust west of Africa. It was a coincidence, or here is an instance of 2 enormous volumes of dust that had one origin. There was an unnoticed hurricane in Africa which strewed Europe and daubed Australia, precipitating nowhere between these 2 continents. Or 2 vast volumes of dust were discharged from a disturbance somewhere beyond this earth, drifting here, arriving so nearly simultaneously that the indications are that the space between the source and this stationary earth is not of enormous extent, but was traversed in a few days or a few weeks. There was no known eruption upon this earth at this time. If here, but unknown, it would have to be an eruption more tremendous than any of the known eruptions of this earth. There was a new star. It was found by a professional astronomer upon photographs of the constellation Gemini taken upon March 8th. It may have existed a few weeks before somebody happened to photograph this part of the sky. Cold-blooded scientists, as we hear them called, and their ideal of accuracy. They're more like a lot of spoiled brats, willfully determined to have their own way. In Cosmos, NS 69-422 were reported meteoric phenomena before the destructive earthquake in Calabria, Italy, September 8, 1905. It was said, or it was announced, that Professor Agamemnon was investigating. It would have been a smash to conventional science if Professor Agamemnon had confirmed these reports. We know what to expect. According to the account in Cosmos, first came a fall of meteors, and then 3/4 of an hour later, to this same place upon this probably stationary Earth, came a great meteor. It exploded, and in the ground was a shock by which 4,600 buildings were destroyed and 4,000 persons were killed. A volume of sound from crashing walls and billows of roars from falling roofs sailed like a ship in a storm. When it sank, lamentations leaped from it. Because of underlying oneness, the sounds of a catastrophe are renderable in the terms of any other field of phenomena. Structural principles are the same, either in phonetic or biologic anatomy. A woe or an insect or a centipede is a series of segments. Or the wreck of a city was a cemetery. Convulsed into animation, it was Resurrection Day, as not conceived of by religionists. What is that word? Concatenations of sounds arose from burials. Spinal columns of groans were exhuming from ruination. Articulations of sobs clung to them. A shout that was jointed with oaths reached out from a hole. A church, which for centuries had been the den of a parasite, sank to a heap. It was a maw that engulfed a congregation. From it came the chant of a litany that was a tapeworm emerging from a ruptured stomach. Choruses broke into moans that were rows of weeping willows. A prayer crossed a field of murmurs and was gored by a blasphemy. Tellers of beads told ladders up which ran profanities. Then came submergence again in a chorus. In earthquake lands, it is the belief of the people that there is a goddess or a godness that at times of catastrophes directs them to flock to churches. My own theology is in agreement. It is by such concentrations that the elimination of surplusages is facilitated. But in Virgin Mary's were replaced by images of Mrs. Sanger, there would be no such useful murders. It is said in the Bullsock Astro de France, October 1905, that luminous phenomena had preceded this catastrophe in Calabria. Observations upon appearances in the sky were gathered by Professor Alfani and were recorded by him in the Revista de Fisca. But it was Professor Agamemnon's decision upon reported phenomena in the sky that was awaited by the scientific world. From time to time, in scientific periodicals, there was something to the effect that he was investigating. Not only meteors were told of, there was a fall of dust from the sky at Terilio. Explained. There had been an eruption of Stromboli. All right, chapter 28, page 809. Comptus Rendus 141-576, report by M. LaCroix, who had been living near Stromboli at the time, that at this time of the fall of dust there had been no more than normal activity of Stromboli. Long afterward, the result of Professor Agamemnon's investigation was published. He could find only one witness. It is not easy to think of an organic control that would beguile its human supernumeraries into manageable concentrations for limited purposes, also permit of Professor Agamemnon to receive of warnings for them. But if in supermetabolism there is, as in suborganisms, the catabolism of destructions, also there are restorations. Anabolic vibrations known to the people of this earth as sympathy and charity shook from pockets as far away as California, money that rebuilt the mutilated tissue of Italy. Something else that every conventionalist will explain as mere coincidence is that down from the sky came deluges upon the quaking land of Calabria. There was widespread need for water at this time. India, pitiable, as described in accounts of one of the severest of droughts, the wilt of a province. The ebb of its life is at the rate of 2,000 of its starving inhabitants a day in the town of Sindh. Its people shrivel and its fields burn down, wrinkled with trains of dark-skinned refugees, a band of natives in a desolate copse, trunks and limbs of leafless little trees and shrunken arms and legs merge in one jungle of emaciation. A starving native flat in a field, he has crawled away from the long white cloud of dust of a trampled road. It might be hell anywhere, but there are glimpses of the escape. What is that? Especial hell. Wait. It might be hell anywhere, but there are glimpses of the especial hell that is India. Breech clout of the starving native, pinned to it a string of jewels which, though dying, he had stolen. Long, wide cloud of dust that is a landscape girdle, and it is emblazoned with a Raja's elephants. There was intense suffering at Lahore. All the gods were prayed to for rain. Upon the 9th of September, there was an earthquake at Lahore. All the gods answered at once, combining their deliveries with an efficiency that smashed houses. Allahabad, Pioneer Mail, September 15th, houses collapsing in great numbers and the occupants wandering homeless. Such an occurrence at the season is most unprecedented and has taken everybody by surprise. Main Street, any good-sized American city, a dull afternoon, the barbershop and the cigar store on the corner, much dullness. A sudden frenzy. Main Street rushes out of the town. Or a human mind in a monotonous state of smugness. There's a temptation or the smash of a conviction, and something that has taken for a principle rushes out of it in a torrent of broken beliefs. That delirium or frenzy or anything else mental or human is not exclusively mental or human, but just what are my data for thinking that the principal street of an American city ever did rush out of the town? Well, something similar. It was at the time of the deluges in India. There was a monstrous fall of water in Kashmir. Many of the inhabitants of the city of Srinagar, Kashmir, lived in rows of houseboats upon the river Jhelum, a sluggish, muddy stream with so little visible motion that between the rows it looked like a smooth pavement. It suddenly went up 17 feet. The two long rows of houseboats rushed away. Another river in Kashmir smashed a village. On its banks it left parallel confusions. Notch a butterfly's wings. This is mutilation. But correspondingly notch the other wing and there is balance. Two mutilations may be harmony. The doubly hideous may be beautiful. If on both sides of the river that was a subsiding axis, mothers simultaneously screamed over the bodies of children. This correspondence was the soul of design. Two anguishes neatly balanced in parallel lines of wreckage satisfy the requirements of those who worship godness as only harmony. A quaking zone of Europe and Asia was deluged. Drought in Turkey, earthquakes, plentiful rain. Tremendous falls of water and shocks were continuing in Calabria. Spain was flooded. September 27th, another severe shock at Lahore, and this day, again, dust of unknown origin fell from the sky in Calabria. A current of hot air came with it. According to the Levant Herald, October 9th, many persons were asphyxiated. According to description, it was a volcanic blast that cannot be traced to origin upon this earth. If it came from somewhere beyond this earth, such a repetition in Calabria is a coincidence or is an indication that this earth is stationary. It is easier to call it a coincidence. There was a new star. Upon the night of August 18th, an auroral beam such as has often been seen in the sky at times of volcanic eruptions upon this earth and at times of new stars, was seen in England. Upon the 31st of August, Mrs. Fleming at Harvard University Observatory, looking over photographic plates, saw that a new star had been recorded on and after the 18th. The new star, diminishing, continued to shine during September. Our expression upon auroral beams is that vast beams of light have often been seen in the sky at times when terrestrial volcanoes were active. That similar appearances have been seen at times of new stars and may be considered light effects of volcanoes not terrestrial. For records of several of these beams, one while Stromboli was violent, September 1st, 1891, and one July 16th, 1892, while on the greatest eruptions of Etna was occurring. See Nature, volumes 44 and 45, and Popular Astronomy 10-249. For one of the latest instances, see newspapers. April 16, 1926. While Mauna Loa, Hawaii was in eruption, a beam of light was seen in Nebraska. There's a new light in the heavens, and there's a disturbance upon this earth as if in interaction that could not occur if trillions of miles intervene. Mere coincidence. There's a quake in Formosa. And there's a quake in California. Only coincidence, says the conventionalists who are committed to local explanations. April 18, 1906, the destruction of San Francisco. The governor of California appointed a commission of 8 professors to investigate the catastrophe. The 8 professors ignored, as coincidence, everything else that had occurred at the time and explained in the usual local geological terms in Nature 73-608 is published Dr. Charles Davidson's explanation, which is in terms of a local substance. Dr. Davidson mentions nothing else that occurred at the time. At the time, a disastrous quake in Formosa and the most violent eruption of Vesuvius since April 1872. Activity in a long-dormant volcano in the Canary Islands, quake in Alberta, Canada, sudden rise and fall of Lake Geneva, Switzerland, eruption of Mount Azuma, Japan. See back to the occurrence of St. Pierre, Martinique, May 1902, 30,000 persons who perished properly, blackened into cinders with academic sanction. They turned into ashes, but the principles of an orthodoxy were upheld. January 1907, and the ignoramuses of Jamaica. They saved their own lives because they did not know better. About 3 o'clock afternoon of January 14, 1907, there was a sudden darkness at Kingston, Jamaica. People cried to one another that an earthquake was coming, and many of them ran to parks and other open spaces. The earthquake came. The people who ran to the open spaces lived, but 1,000 of the others were killed by falling houses. A web that has spun of dogmas caught 1,000 victims. After the quake, the ruins of Kingston sprawled like a spider, stretching out long black lines that were trains of hearses. But all who ran to the parks, believing that appearances in the sky did mean that catastrophe upon the earth was coming, lived. I have given data for thinking that a de Balor or any other conventionalist would ridicule these people for so interpreting a mere coincidence. October 1907 and March 1908, falls from the sky of substances like soot and ashes, catastrophes upon this earth and new stars that were discovered by amateurs. See the English Mechanic 86-237, 260, and the Observatory 31-215. December 30th, 1910, new star, disastrous earthquakes, and enormous fall from the sky of a substance like ashes. The new star, Nova Lacertae, was discovered by Dr. Espin, a professional astronomer. Photographic records were looked up. Almost 6 weeks this star had been shining unobserved at this Earth's observatories. It was visible without a telescope, 5th magnitude. For almost 6 weeks, a new star had shone over the observatories of this earth, and no milkman had reported it. However, without chagrin, we note this remissness, because it is no purpose of this book to spout eulogies to the amateur in science. It is only in astronomy that the humiliation of professionals by amateurs is common. I have no records of little boys running into laboratories, startling professors of chemistry or physics with important discoveries. The achievements of amateurs in astronomy rank about with a giving of information upon current events to a Rip Van Winkle. I'll not apologize because no night watchman hammered for several hours upon the front door of an observatory, rudely disturbing the spiders. All right, chapter 29. Why don't they see when sometimes magnificently there is something to see? The answer is the same as the answer to another question. Why sometimes do they see when there is nothing to see? In the year 1899, Campbell, the astronomer, announced that the star Capella is a stereoscopic binary or has a companion star as determined by the spectroscope. Astronomers of Greenwich Observatory investigated. One of them looked through the telescope and he said, or rather announced, that he saw it. Another of the astronomers looked for the companion. He announced that he saw it. 8 other astronomers followed. Each announced that he saw it. But now the astronomers say that this alleged companion cannot be seen in any telescope. See Duncan Astronomy, page 335. The Andromeda Nebula is said to be so far away that though a description of a nearby view of its parts would read like divorce statistics in the United States, no dissolving motion can be seen by observers on this earth. In astronomical books published in the past appeared reproductions of photographs of this nebula which were as artfully touched up, I should say, as any life of a saint ever was by a theologian. It was given a most definitely spiral appearance to convey an impression of whirlpool motion, but the nebula theory of existence has passed away. In astronomical books of recent date, we see no such definite look of a whirlpool in pictures of the Andromeda Nebula, but more of a stratified appearance. The astronomers see whatever they want to see, whenever they do see, and then see to it that we see as they see. So though according to our records one would think otherwise, there is considerable seeing by astronomers. If I look at a distant house and see faces appearing at windows, something seems to tell me that the stoop of the house is not flying in one direction, the roof of it scooting some other way, and every brick upon a jamboree of its own. Of course, minutely, there are motions, but if the house is not so far away as to prevent the seeing of new faces looking out, I argue that other changes, such as the roof in a frenzy to get away from the stoop, would, if there were such incompatibilities, be visible. Of course, this is only argument. If we can have neat little expression, that's mentality's profoundest. The Andromeda Nebula is said to be so far away that tremendous motions of its parts cannot be seen. But more than 50 new stars in it have been seen looking out, so we are realizing how numerous new stars are if in one little celestial formation more than 50 have been seen. If amateur astronomers were as numerous as amateur golf players, for instance, we'd realize much more. Pronounced changes such as appearances and disappearances of stars have been watched, but no change in relative positions of stars has ever been watched occurring. There are parts of the sky that are dusty with little stars. If they were not such good-looking little things, the heavens would be filthy with them. But no grain of these shining sands has ever been watched changing its position relatively to other grains. All recorded changes of positions are so slight that some of them may be attributed to inaccuracies in charting in earlier times, and some to various stresses that have nothing to do with independent motions. Just here we are not discussing the alleged phenomena of companion stars, but our own expressions require that there be small changes in positions of stars, just as terrestrial volcanoes change slightly. Not a star has ever been seen to cross another star, but observations upon other changes in the stars are frequent. For records of 5 new stars in 5 months, see Popular Astronomy, March 1920. Many of the so-called new stars have been sudden flares of faint old stars. Upon this earth, there have been sudden flares of volcanic craters that were dormant, or that were supposed to be extinct, and it was not by collision. Nothing came along and knocked against them. Apart from our expressions upon organic suppressions, it is easy enough to understand one aspect of the origin of the present astronomical doctrine. It was in a time of mathematicians to whom astronomical observations were secondary. The only one of these earlier ones who was an industrious observer, Tycho Brahe, gave his opinion that this Earth is stationary. The rest of them did little observing and spent their time calculating. Nowadays, new stars are seen often, but for 178 years, the calculators saw not one of them. In their time, it was considered crude or vulgar to see. Mentality. I don't think it's mentally. Sure it is. Mentally always has been bullied. Its mentality has always been bullied by snobbery. In the times of the founders of astronomical dogmas, observations were sneered at and were called empiricism. Any way that is not the easiest way always is held in contempt until competition forces harder methods. The easiest of all affectations is the aristocratic pose, if by aristocracy we mean minimalization of doing anything. There's a coarseness to anybody who works. Give this a thought. He might sweat. Amateurs out in their backyard see with their little spyglasses much that the professionals miss, but they catch colds. When a backyard amateur like W.F. Denning reports something that represents patience and snuffling, Denning blew his nose and kept his eyes open. The inmates of observatories, when not asleep, are calculating. It's easier on brains and it's easier on noses. Back in times when little boys were playing hopscotch and marbles and had not yet taken up the new sport of giving astronomers astronomical information, or in those times when only astronomers were attending somewhat to astronomical matters, and when therefore changes in stars were unheard of, arose the explanation of vast distances to account for unobserved changes. The look is that stars do not change positions relatively to one another for the same reason that Vesuvius and Etna do not, or there are very slight changes of position, but just as relatively to each other Vesuvius and Etna change. But no star has ever been seen to pass over any other star any more than has Vesuvius ever been seen sailing in the sky over Etna. Other changes of stars that are said to be so far away that changes of position cannot be seen have been noted. For a discussion of the stars that have disappeared, see Nature 99-159. For a list of about 40 missing stars, see Monthly Notices RAS 77-56. This list is only supplementary to other lists. Upon March 14, 1912, the newspapers told that the discovery of a new star had been announced by the Kiel Observatory, Germany. No reader of newspapers of that time would suppose otherwise than that vigilant astronomers, at least worth their keep, knew when a new star appeared. Early in the morning of March 11th, earthquakes of unusual intensity were recorded at many places in the United States. At Harvard University, the calculators announced that the center of the quake was in the West Indies or Mexico. Newspaper readers, if they paid any attention, were properly impressed with this ability of intellectuals in Massachusetts to know what was going on in the West Indies or Mexico. But newspapers the next day told of a quake upon the 11th of Triangle Island off Vancouver, British Columbia, and of nothing in either the West Indies or Mexico. At Victoria, BC, it was calculated that the center of the quake was in the Pacific Ocean 400 miles westward. The same readers, forgetting just where the calculators of Harvard had placed the quake, thought it marvelous how the scientists can know these things. Sometimes distant skies turn black with the shadows of disasters. Had this quake centered in a densely populated region, we'd have another datum of a distant fall of probably volcanic material about the time of a catastrophe. Upon the day of the quake, black water fell from the sky near Colmar, about 30 miles from London. The rain was not muddy, but was like diluted ink. Somebody thought that it was soot from London. Somebody else thought not, pointing out that if this were so, ink, not much diluted, would often fall in London. The night of the 12th, the astronomers of this Earth's observatories were calculating whether the town of Dumbass, Norway, as the astronomers of Kiel, Germany, were disturbed by a telegram. It was from an amateur named Enibo, telling that there was a new star in the constellation Gemini and that it was visible without a telescope. Astronomers in other parts of this Earth were notified. They looked up from what they considered astronomical matters and saw that the amateur had discovered. In November 1913, an astronomer photographed a part of the constellation Sagittarius. I don't know what his idea was, perhaps simply in somnambulically he photographed and had no ideas. 6 years later, somebody found out that he had photographed a new star. Then other photographs were examined. Astronomers are pretty keen at detecting something that has been pointed out to them, and they learned that they had photographed this star rising from 10th to 7th magnitude between the 21st and the 22nd of November. Wanted something by way of data for us. Like every other theorist, we find just that. Nature 94-372. That 7 days after the maximum of this new star, an afterglow which can be attributed to no known volcanic eruption upon this Earth was seen in the sky in Italy, France, Belgium, and England. April 25, 1917, a professional astronomer photographed a new star, magnitude 6.5, in the constellation Hercules. The next day, there was a disastrous earthquake in Italy. Upon May 1st, a great quake, perhaps in the constellation Hercules, whereabouts unknown to this Earth's scientists, was registered by this Earth's seismographs. Domes of observatories look like big snail shells, architectural symbolism. It took the astronomers about 3 years to learn that they had photographed the new star in Hercules. If newspaper editors were like astronomers, they'd send out photographers rather busily, and perhaps years later, if they could descend from journalism into doing some newspaper work, they'd examine plates. They'd tell of a fire that had occurred long before. They write up some fashion notes upon the modes in the reader's childhood, like dealers in stale stars, they'd wonder at a lack of public interest. Upon March 6, 1918, black rain fell from the sky in Ireland. If our preconceptions so direct, we relate this occurrence with smoky discharges from factory chimneys of South Wales or somewhere else in Great Britain, and it is better that we do not ask why black rains are not common near Pittsburgh, or we note that the next night there was in the sky a crimson appearance that worried many communities in Europe and North America. For a week, there were, in the newspapers of New York and London, descriptions of this glare and comments upon it. People thought that there was a great fire somewhere. I give data for thinking that there may have been a volcanic eruption somewhere. March 6th, the fall of black rain. March 7th, the glare in the sky. March 9th, down up this earth fell dusts in volumes that were proportional to the glare. See American Journal Science Monthly Weather Review in Science America of this period. There was a fall of dust in Wisconsin and in Michigan, and there was a fall of dust in Vermont. These falls, so far apart in Ireland, in western states, and in Vermont, look like what is called indication of an origin somewhere beyond this earth. There is no findable record of any disturbance upon this earth by which to explain. No new star was reported, but there may have been a stellar eruption in a part of the daytime sky reflecting in a glare at night. There may have been relation with an occurrence in June. In the meantime, there were several remarkable glares in the sky. In the evening of June 8th of this year, 1918, two men, one of them in Madras, India, and the other in South Africa, looked up at the sky and saw a brilliant new star in the constellation Aquila. Each of them notified an observatory which had not been observing. Each of the 8th, evening of the 8th, Harvard University Observatory notified by an amateur. The astronomers of Harvard had seen nothing new, but telegram after telegram came to them from other amateurs. Whatever else the astronomers of Lick Observatory were doing, I don't know. They were probably calculating. But they, too, were receiving telegrams, and when told by amateurs to look up at the sky and see a new star, they looked up at the sky and saw the new star. See Pub's AstroSoc Pacific, August 1918. Besides the amateur in Madras, an amateur in northern India notified the observatories. English Mechanic, August 9th. Professionals of New Zealand notified by an amateur in Nature 101-285 is published a list of amateurs who, in England, had reported this new star to official centers of unobservation. There is only one record of a professional astronomer who, without information from amateurs, saw this new star. One of the astronomers of Greenwich Observatory had looked up at the sky and had seen this new star, Nature 101-285, that he had seen it, but he had not recognized it was a new star. One of the amateurs who saw it and recognized it was a schoolboy named Reg. London Times, June 21st. The Lisbon Observatory was notified by a boy, age 14. All right, chapter 30, page 820. I'm thinking of an abstraction that was noted by Aristotle and that was taken by Hegel for the basis of his philosophy, that wherever there is a conflict of extremes, there is an outcome that is not absolute victory on either side, but is a compromise, or what Hegel called the union of complementaries. Our own controversy is an opposition of extremes, that this earth moves swiftly, that this earth is stationary. In terms of controversies and their outcomes, I cannot think that either of these sides can be altogether right or will absolutely defeat the other when comes some way of finding out and settling this issue. The idea of stationariness came first, then as a sheer mechanical reaction, inasmuch as Copernicus had not one datum that a conventionalist of today would accept as meaning anything, came the idea of a swiftly moving Earth. An intermediate view will probably appear and prevail. My own notion of equilibrium between these extremes, backed up with our chapters of data, is that within a revolving starry shell that, relatively to the extravagances of the astronomical extremists, is not far away, this roundish Earth is almost central, but is not absolutely stationary, having various slight movements. Perhaps it does rotate, but within a period of a year. Like everybody else, I have my own notions upon what constitutes reasonableness, and this is my idea of a compromise. The primary view had for its support the highest mathematical authoritativeness of its era. Now, so has the secondary view. Mathematics has been subservient to one view as the other. Mostly our data have been suggestive or correlative, but it may be that there are visual indications of a concave land in the sky or of a substantial shell around this Earth. There are dark places in the sky, and some of them have the look of land. They are called dark nebula. Some astronomers have speculated upon them as glimpses of a limiting outline of a system as a whole. See back to Domage quoted upon the subject. My own notion is of a limiting outlining substance that I call a shell. Dark nebula have the look of bare or starless patches of a shell. Some of them may be formations that are projections from a shell. They hang like superstalactites in a vast and globular cave. At least one of these appearances has the look of a mountain peak. In several books by astronomers, plates of this subject have appeared. See Duncan's Astronomy. It is known as the Horsehead Nebula. It stands out as a vast sullen refusal to mix into a frenzy of phosphorescent confetti. It is a solid-looking gloom, such as some election night the Woolworth building would be if Republican and all the rest of Broadway hysterical with a Democratic celebration. Over its summit comes light like the fringe of dawn topping a mountain. Something is shining behind this formation, but penetrates no more than it would shine through a mountain. It may be that relatively there are few stars, that hosts of tiny lights in the sky are reflections upon irregularities of the shell land from large stars. Among expressions that I have not developed is one that is suggested by a circumstance that astronomers consider strange. This is that some variable stars have a period of about a year. Just what variations of stars that are said to be trillions of miles away could have to do with a period upon the ultra-remote Earth cannot be conceived of in orthodox terms. The suggestion is that these lights with variations corresponding with advances and recessions of the sun moving spirally around this almost stationary Earth are reflections of sunlight from points of land or from lakes in extinct or dormant craters. It may be that many variations of light that have been attributed to companions are tidal phenomena in celestial lakes that shine as reflections from the sun or from the stars, which may be lakes of molten lava. There is a formation in the constellation Cygnus that has often been noted. It is faintly luminescent, but this light, according to Professor Hubble, is a reflection from the star Deneb. It is shaped like North America, and it is known as the America Nebula. Out from its Gulf of Mexico are islands of light. One of these may be a San Salvador someday. Like Alaska to birds from the north, the Horsehead Nebula stands out from its background like something to fly to. Star after star after star has blazed a story, sometimes publishing tragedy on Earth illustrated with spectacles in the heavens. But when transcribed into human language, these communications are depopularized with determinations and pronouncements. So our tribes have left these narratives of fires and smokes and catastrophes to the wise men who have made titanic tales unintelligible with their little technical jargons. The professionals will not unprofessionalize. They will not give up their system. Where have the wise men ever done so among the Eskimos or the hairy Anus, the Zulus or the Kafirs? Whatever we are, they are acting to keep us whatever we are, as the Zulus are kept whatever they are. We are beguiled by snoozers who have been beaten time after time by schoolboys. There's a fire in the sky, and ashes and smoke and dust reach this earth, as sometimes after an eruption of Vesuvius discharges reach Paris. There may be volcanoes in a land of the sky so close to this earth that, if intervening space be not airless and most intensely cold, an expedition could sail away in a dash to the stars that would be a bold and magnificent trifle. Chapter 31. Besides the new star, which was an object so conspicuous that it was discovered widely except by astronomers, there was another astronomical occurrence in the month of June 1918, an eclipse of the sun. It was observed in Oregon. We can't expect such a check-up as when Coogan's Bluff and the Consolidated Gas Company get into astronomy, but Oregonians set their alarm clocks and looked up at the sky. See Mitchell's Eclipses of the Sun, page 67. The astronomers admitted an error of 14 seconds in their prediction. Measurements of ordinary refinement are in hair breadths, but a hair is coarse material to the ethereal astronomers who use filaments spun by spiders. And just where do the astronomers get their cobwebs? This book of ours is full of mysteries, but here is something that is not one of them. My own opinion is that an error of only 14 seconds is a very credible approximation, but it is a huge and grotesque blunder when compared with the fairy-like refinements that the astronomers dream of are theirs in matters that cannot be so easily checked up. To readers who are not clear upon this point, I repeat that predictions of eclipses cannot be cited in support of conventionality against our own expressions, because whether upon the basis that this earth moves or is stationary, eclipses can be predicted, and lo, come to pass. But lo, if looking on there be an intelligent representative of the Consolidated Gas Company or an Oregonian with an alarm clock, predictions aren't just exactly what they should be. We have divided astronomers into professionals and amateurs, but wherever there are differences, there is somewhere the merging point that demonstrates continuity. W.F. Denning represents the amateur-professional merging point. He has never had a job, though it does not look to me that job is the right word, in an observatory, but he has written a great deal upon astronomical matters. He is an accountant in the city of Bristol, England. He has nothing to do with observatories, but has a celebrated backyard. Upon the night of August 20th, 1920, Denning sat in his backyard and in surroundings that were touched up most unacademically by cats on the fences, though observatory-like enough, with snores from back windows. He discovered Nova Cygni 3. This is another instance of a new star appearing close to where there had been preceding new stars, as if all were eruptions in one region of especially active volcanic land. There were earthquakes in this period. In the United States, there were the sudden deluges that are called cloudbursts. Upon the night of August 28th, a seismic wave drowned 200 persons on the island of Saghalien, off the east coast of Siberia, with, four nights. Astronomers of the so-called observatories had been photographing this star. Students of phenomena of somnambulism will be interested in our data. When Denning woke up the astronomers, they looked at what they had been unconsciously doing and learned that from the 16th of the month that the star had risen from 7th to about 3rd magnitude. A star of 3rd magnitude is a conspicuous star. In the whole sky there are photographic magnitudes, only 111 of this size. At any one time, not more than 40 of them are visible. The limit of visibility without a telescope is somewhere between the 6th and 7th magnitudes, so it is said. According to our data, the limit of seeing depends upon who's looking. I wonder what ironic fellow first called these snug little centers of inattention observatories. He had a wit of his own, whoever he was. Discovery of the new star, if not a comet, of August 7th, 1921, has been attributed to a professional wise man, Dr. Campbell of Lick Dormitory, but it was a brilliant and conspicuous appearance. Most of the new stars that professionals have discovered or have had discovered for them by the not very eagle-eyed females of Harvard have been small points of photographic plates. English Mechanic 114-211 records of observations by 4 amateurs before the time of Director Campbell's discovery. One of these observations was 24 hours earlier. Some time ago, I read an astronomer's complaint against heavy traffic near an observatory, though now I have different ideas as to an astronomer's dislike for disturbance. Night times, I was not so experienced then and innocently supposed that he meant that delicate instruments were jarred. A convention of Methodist ministers, and how agreeable it would be to note in the midst of preciseness and purity one of these parsons standing on his head. Or see the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, 1922, upon page 400, there is a diagram. Mistakes that I make and errors of yours, contrasting with the much advertised divinity of the astronomers. Page 400, in the midst of a learned treatise upon adiabatic expansions and convective equilibrium, is printed a diagram. It is upside down. I attended this convention of pedantries, of course inspired by a religious faith that is mine, that I'd not have to look far for a crook in its bombast, or somewhere a funny little touch of waywardness in its irreproachability. But especially I tended to pick out something of which in this year, 1922, the astronomers were boasting, to contrast with something they were doing. I picked out a long laudation upon an astronomer who had received a gold medal for predicting the motions of a star cluster for a term of 100 billion years, to contrast with September 20th, I think that's, 100,000 million billion years, to contrast with September 20th, 1922, an eclipse of the sun. See Mitchell's Eclipses of the Sun, page 67, and the predictions by the astronomers. They made one error of 16 seconds and another error of 20 seconds. There are persons who do not believe in ordinary fortune tellers, yet, without a quiver in their credulities, they read of an astronomical gypsy who tells the fortunes of a star for 100 billion years, though according to conventionality, that star is 60 times 60 times 24 times 365 times 100,000 times farther away than is the moon, motions of which cannot be exactly foretold unless the observations are going to B say at Baja de Paranagua or somewhere in Jungaria. The eclipse of September 20th, 1922 was checked up by police constables in Australia, but the eclipse of October 21st, 1930 was observed at Neopho. This time, the dispatches sent by the astronomers told of a complete success. The eclipse began exactly as predicted. There are records of seeming new stars that have blazed up like spasmodic eruptions, then dying out. For Dr. Anderson's report upon one of these appearances, May 8, 1923, see Popular Astronomy 31-422. Upon the 7th, Etna was active, earthquake in Anatolia, extraordinary rise and fall of the Mediterranean at Gibraltar. The observatories missed Dr. Anderson's observation, but at one of them a small new star was photographed night of May 5th. I neglected to note whether on a photographic plate this was immediately detected. Upon February 13, 1923, an increase of the star Beta Certi was reported. There was interest in the newspapers. Maps of the sky were published. If newspapers start first paging astronomical occurrences, putting down X marks for stars as well as for positions of bodies of the murdered, there will be more interest. This is dangerous to the astronomers, but so long as their technicalities hold out, they have good protection. Even so, there might be inquiries into what the observatories are doing when time after time only amateurs are observing. The observatories had, of course, missed this rise of Beta Ceti, But when told by an amateur where to look, professionals of Yerkes and Givizy confirmed the report. For the fullest account, see the Bullsock Astro de France of this period. Upon February 22nd, a yellow dust, perhaps a discharge from an increased volcanic activity in Cetus, fell from the sky in Westphalia. London Evening Standard, February 27th. The amateur this time was a schoolboy aged 16. Night of May 27, 1925, the Rip Van Winkles of the South African Observatory were disturbed by an amateur. He told them that there was a new star in the southern constellation Pictor. When they were aroused, the Rips looked up and saw the new star, and they stayed awake long enough to learn that, somnambulically, they had for months been photographing it. For months it had been gleaming over the observatories of 4 continents. There are slits in the domes of observatories. The fixed grin of a clown, the slit in the dome of an observatory. September 21st, 1930, that the astronomers had ascertained the heat received from the 13th magnitude star to be 631 times that of the heat from the faintest star visible to the unaided eye. That the faintest visible star radiates upon the whole United States no more heat than the sun radiates upon 1 square yard of said U.S. A grin in the dark, or the sardonic slit in an observatory night times. Most likely the inmates haven't a notion what it is symbolized, but we contrast an alleged perception of 631 times the inconceivable with this item in Popular Astronomy, 1925, page 540. That 44 nights before the amateur's discovery, Nova Pictoris had shone as a star of 3rd magnitude and had been perceived by no astronomer. The building that laughs, as a modern Victor Hugo would call an observatory with a slit in it. Fixed grin of the clown, and, according to theatrical conventions, his head is full of seriousness. September 24th, 1930, this is what came from a building that laughed, though its dome was full of astronomers. That, according to spectroscopic determinations at Mount Wilson, a distant nebula is moving away from this Earth at a rate of 6,800 miles a second. That, upon the day of the calculations, the distance of this nebula was 75 million times 60 times 60 times 24 times 365 times 186,000 miles. To appreciate the clownishness of this, see our data for accepting that the spectroscope tells about what is told by tea leaves in a teacup, which is considerable if one wants to be told considerable. To realize the pathos of this, think of the grinning old clown who gags have played out, who is driven to most extravagant antics to hold a little attention. Our general expression is that the inmates of this Earth's observatories are not astronomers but are mathematicians. Since medieval times, there has never been a shake-up in this system of ancient lore comparable with Lyellism in geology or Darwinism in biology, or the reconstructions of thought brought about by radioactivity in physics and chemistry. Einsteinianism was a slight shock, but it is concerned with differences of minute quantities. Mathematicians are incurable. They are inert to the new because the new is a surprise, and mathematics concerns itself with the expected. It does not occur to me that there might be good results if the next millionaire who contemplates donating a big telescope should instead send around to the observatories big quantities of black coffee. But such is the concordance between the twinkles of the stars and the nods of drowsy heads that I'd not much like to disturb such harmony. Nova Pictoris, like many other so-called new stars, was an increase of an old star. For 25 years, it had from time to time been photographed as a speck of the 12th magnitude. There is nothing on any photographic plate to indicate that another star was going to collide with it. It went up just as dimly shining or only slightly active volcanoes of this Earth sometimes become violent. No star has ever been seen to cross another star, but just such changes. Hold on. Let me see. Such changes as have been seen in volcanoes of this Earth have been seen in stars, mostly in their books, astronomers telling of what they call proper motion. Let me do that sentence again. Mostly in their books, astronomers telling of what they call proper motion do all that they can to give an impression of the stars as moving with tremendous velocities. But here is Newcomb, Astronomy for Everybody, page 327, quoted upon the subject. If Ptolemy should come to life after his sleep of nearly 1,800 years and be asked to compare the heavens as they are now with those of his time, he would not be able to see the slightest difference in the configuration of a single constellation. All right. Sorry if that's real loud when I do that. I don't really mean to. 828, chapter 31. And if Ptolemy should come back and be asked to compare the Mediterranean lands as they are now with those of his time, he would not be able to see the slightest difference in the configuration of any land, even though erosions of various kinds have been constant. What Orion was, Orion is, in the sense that what the configuration of Italy was, it now is, in the sense that in all recorded time, Italy has been booting Sicily, but has never scored a goal. There is no consistency, and there is no inconsistency in our hyphenated state of phenomenal being. There is consistency, inconsistency. Everything that is inconsistent with something is consistent with something else. In the oneness of allness, I am, in some degree or aspect, guilty of, or infected with, or suffering from everything that I attack. Now I, too, am aristocratic. Let anybody else who is a patrician, as I now am, read this book and contrast the principles of orthodox astronomy with the expressions in this book and ask himself, which is the easier and lazier way, with the lesser necessity for effort and with the lesser need for the use of brains, and therefore the more aristocratic view. That for, say, 1,800 years, stars have scarcely moved because though changes in them have often been seen, they are too far away for changes in them to be observed, or that the stars have scarcely moved because they are points in a shell-like formation that holds them in place. However, the orthodox visualization of stars rushing at terrific velocities in various directions and never getting anywhere is so in accordance with the unachievements of all other phenomenal things that I'd feel my heresies falter were it not for other data. But what other data or of other circumstances? In this day of everybody's suspicion against circumstantial evidence, just what is not generally realized is that orthodox astronomy is founded upon nothing but circumstantial evidence. Also, all our data and repetitions and agreements of data are nothing but circumstantial evidence. Simply mention circumstantial evidence relatively, say, to a murder trial, and most of us look doubtful. Consequently, I have only expressions and acceptances, other data, or other circumstances. Last of March 1928, the Nova Pictoris had split into two parts. Part was seen to have moved from part, or divisions occur in this Earth's volcano. So then, when changes of positions of stars do occur, the stars are not so far away that changes of position cannot be seen. 10 little astronomers squinting through a tube, or more characteristically employed, or looking at a mirror. They had been told upon the highest authority that the star Capella had a companion. Said they, or announced they saw it or perceived it, having calmed down in the matter of dust from an African desert, but seeming to have a need for something to be furious about. I now turn my indignations upon companion stars. Most persons have in their everyday affairs plenty to annoy them, but it seems that I must have something of exclusiveness to my annoyances. If stars be volcanoes in a concave land surrounding this earth, the notion of companion stars perhaps enrages me because I do not visualize one volcano revolving around another volcano. If some stars do revolve around other stars, I may as well give up this book as a whole, or I shall have to do some explaining, which won't be much trouble. Explaining is equilibrating. That is what all things phenomenal are doing. I now have a theory that once upon a time our existence was committed as a bad error, and that everything in it has been excusing itself, or has in one way or another been equilibrating ever since. It is as natural to a human being to explain as it is to a lodestone to adjust to a magnet. Let anybody look up determinations upon the dark companion of Algol, for instance. He will find record not of a theory, but of theory after theory replacing one another. In the matter of the light ones, let him look up data upon the light companion of Sirius. He will read in the textbooks that around Sirius a light star revolves with the most accurately known period, which demonstrates the soundness of mathematical astronomy. But in scientific journals, which are not so uncompromisingly committed to propaganda, he will read that this is not so. A faint light has at various times been reported near Sirius in positions that do not accord with the calculated orbit. For no mention of this discrepancy, read the books that reach the general public. March 29th, 1929, the split of Nova Pictoris. There was a cataclysm in a southern constellation. At the same time, there were catastrophes in southern parts of this earth. See back to our expressions upon seeming relations between parts of this earth and parts of the sky that would be nearest to each other. If the stars be points in a shell of land that is not enormously far away, but could not be appreciably nearer if the stars were trillions of miles away. I'd take all data from New York newspapers, quakes in Italy, and a glare in the sky at the time, March 31st, of a quake in Smyrna, sky aflame. The heaviest rain in 50 years poured in Honduras, April 9th, Peru shaking this day, such a fall of snow in Chile that 200 persons and thousands of farm animals were reported to be buried in drifts, quakes, and panics in Mexico. Orthodoxy, all this by mere coincidence. Our expression that nebulous rings were going out from Nova Pictoris just as rings of smoke and dust go out from Vesuvius during an eruption. The 14th of April was the day of the Bulgarian devastations. Quakes continuing in Bulgaria, quakes in Mexico, towns rocking in southern Mexico, quakes continuing in Peru, quakes in Greece. On the 19th, a violent snowstorm in Portland this day. Torrents were pouring upon the quaking land of Bulgaria. A de Balor or a Davison or a Malin would not mention these torrents in an account of this quake. The severest shock ever recorded in Johannesburg, South Africa, occurred upon the 21st. The next day, Corinth, Greece, was wrecked and torrents fell from the sky at the time of this quake. Nova Pictoris broke into 4 parts, and the cities of Greece wailed rushes of people, seeming discharges moving out from the new star, and a 5-hour rain of mud filled streets ankle high, causing terror at Lemberg and Cernowitz today. wails of the cities of Greece, and they subsided into sodden despairs that were processions of stretchers. Somewhere in a building that collapsed fell a sparrow. The road from Corinth, refugees and their belongings, terrified mules up on their hind legs, hoofing storms of bundles, yells and prayers, and the laughter of jokers, a screaming woman shaking bloody hands, her finger had been hacked off for the rings on them, crying kids whose parents were pulps, prayers to God or to the blessed something or another, the screams of the woman with stumps of fingers. Sudden consciousness of a pulsation, a rhythm of gleams appears in distant sunlight, stars that are watched through the windows of prisons or through openings in any other of the other hells of this earth, and it may be that if all the stars should start to twinkle in unison, the hells of this earth would vibrate out of existence. There's a rhythm of gleams on distant bayonets. Along the road is marching a column of soldiers. The swing of these gleams and it tranquilizes panic. It glistens into new formations. There are long lines of sparkles and sunlight. Tin cups are undulating towards soup kettles. Somewhere else there is an injured sparrow. Storages in its body are giving to its needs from their substance, the tranquilizing of its heartbeats and the reduction of its fever, the rebuilding of its tissues. A British squadron appears in the Bay of Corinth, an Italian warship, an American cruiser. From centers of the American Near East relief are streaming 6,000 blankets, 10,500 tents, 5,000 cases of condensed milk, carloads of flour. If we could think that around this earth and not too vastly far away there is a starry shell, here are the outlines within which to think of our existence as an organism. Now, November 28th, 1930. An enormous fall from the sky of dust and mud in France. I shall not get perhaps all worked up again about this, but I mentioned that it was attributed to a hurricane in the Sahara Desert. December 5th, 1930, the poisonous gas in Belgium. See back to the account in this book, except that these two phenomena were probably volcanic discharges from regions external to this earth, if for them there be no terrestrial explanation. One in France and one in Belgium are arriving relatively near each other, but a week apart, and here is another of our data of this Earth's stationariness. This Earth broke out as if responsively to disturbances somewhere else, volcanic eruptions and disastrous quakes. December 24th, 26th, violent quakes in Argentina and in Alaska, and between these far distant places there was a spectacular arrival of something that may have been a volcanic bomb from a stellar volcano. New York Times, December 26, 1930, the great meteor that was seen and heard in Idaho. The crash, heard for miles, was described as like an earthquake. The deluge that was only a coincidence poured upon the quaking land of Argentina. Rain fell in such torrents that the water was 3 feet deep in several parts of Mendoza City. A strange glow was seen in the sky. Great spears of colored lights flashed across the sky. In the month of January 1931, disturbances upon this earth continued. There may have been a new star. I have the authority of amateurs for thinking so. New York Times, January 7th, 1931, that at San Juan, Puerto Rico, morning of January 6th, my birthday, from 10 o'clock until noon, a strange star had been seen in the western sky. According to an opinion from the Weather Bureau, it may have been not a star, but the planet Venus. This Venus explanation of lights that have been seen in the sky in the daytime is a standard explanation, but according to records, it has often not applied. Catastrophes and deluges, and if we can accept that around this earth there is only a thin zone of extreme coldness, which by the stresses of storms and other variations may often be penetrated by terrestrial evaporations, so that unless replenished from reservoirs somewhere else, this earth would go dry, we can understand a mechanism of necessary transportations of floods from the stars to this earth. Flows of insects and the patter of frogs and the pilgrims cross the Atlantic Ocean. Metabolism in the foot of a frog. And in the United States, a similar readjustment is known as the Civil War. The consciousness of philosophers and theologians and scientists, and to some degree of everybody else, of the state of oneness. And my expression is that the misinterpretation has been in trying to think of universality, or the absolute. Give me more data for thinking that around this Earth there is a starry shell that is not vastly far away, and here is the base for a correlation of all things phenomenal. Oh, where is it? Okay, chapter 32. Star after star after star, and the signs that there were at the times of them. Quake after quake after quake, and the sights in the sky at the times of them. Star after quake after deluge, the sky boils with significances. There are tempests of indication. There's a beam of light in the sky, and it dips into a star. Spattering ponds of ink, it scribbles information. The story is that a vast and inhabitable land surrounds this earth. It is fertile if showers of organic substances that have fallen from the sky came from there. The variable stars are intermittent signs that are advertising enormous real estate opportunities. The story is declaimed by meteors, but most of us stolid ones aren't going to be persuaded by any such sensational appeal to the emotions. The story is more obscurely told with clouds of dust that strew Europe. Most of us can't take a hint the size of a continent. The searchlights of the sun play upon a celebration in the sky. It has been waiting ages to mean something. Just at present known as the Milky Way, it's the Broadway of the sky, and someday explorers from this Earth may parade it. If this Earth is stationary, according to a great deal in this book, that may be a matter of no importance nor bearing. If we accept that teleportation as a natural force exists and suspect that some human beings have known this and have used it, and if we think that the culmination of a series of teleoperations will be the commercial and recreational teleportation of objects and beings, we are concerned little with other considerations and conceive of inhabitants of this earth willing themselves, if that's the way it's done, to Mars or the moon or Polaris. But I take for a proposition that there is an underlying irony, if not sadism, in our existence, which rejoices in driving the most easily driven beings of this earth into doing, at enormous pains and expenses, the unnecessary, the building of complicated telegraph systems with the use of 2 wires, then reducing to 1 wire, then the discovery that the desired effects could be achieved wirelessly. Labors and sufferings of early Arctic explorers to push northward over piles of ice at a rate of 3 or 4 miles a day. Then Bird does it with a whir. Consequently, I concern myself with data for what may be a new field of enormous labors and sufferings, costs of lives and fortunes, misery and bereavements, until finally will come awareness that all this is unnecessary. Upon this basis of mechanical and probably unnecessary voyagings, unless to something disasters to the beings of this earth be necessary, the most important consideration is whether this earth is stationary. There can be no mechanical or suffering exploration from something that is somewhere one day and the next day 60 times 60 times 24 times 19 miles away from there. Then comes the subject of conditions surrounding this earth. If common suppositions be right, or if this earth be surrounded by a void that is intensely cold, penetration to anywhere beyond would probably be, anyway at present, impossible. I compare ideas upon outer space with former ideas upon spaces in the Arctic regions. Resistances to the idea of exploration are similar, but in the wintertime, Arctic regions are not colder than are some of the inhabited parts of Canada. Stephenson, the Arctic explorer, has written that the worst blizzards ever seen by him were in North Dakota. Prevailing ideas as to the intensity of cold surrounding this earth and preventing exploration may be as far astray as are prevailing ideas as to Arctic coldness. Outer space may not be homogeneously cold and may be zoned or pathed with warm areas. Everything of which one knows little has the guise of homogeneousness. If anybody has a homogeneous impression of anything, that is something that he is going to be surprised about. In the London Daily Mail, January 29, 1924, Alan Cobham tells of one of his flights in India. The air was quite warm at 17,000 feet, but as we descended to lower altitudes, it became gradually cooler, and at 12,000 feet, it was icy cold. The higher, the colder is a fixed idea, just as formerly was the supposition that the farther north, the colder the atmosphere. Many reports by aviators and mountain climbers agree. Everybody who does anything out of the ordinary has to think that he suffered. It is one of his compensations, but fixed ideas have a way of not staying fixed. I'd like to know how astronomers get around their idea that comets are mostly of a gaseous composition. If gases would solidify at the temperature in which they suppose those comets to be moving. But stationariness, and what's the good of any of these speculations and collections of data if by no conceivable agility could a returning explorer board a world scooting away from him at a rate of 19 miles a second? In early times, upholders of the idea of stationariness of this Earth argued that a swiftly moving planet would leave its atmosphere behind, but it was said that the air partakes of the planet's motions. Nevertheless, it was agreed that far from this Earth's surface, air, if existing, would not partake of the motions. No motions of this Earth away from them have ever been detected by aviators, but it is said that they have not gone up high enough. But will an aviator, starting northward from somewhere near the equator, partaking, we'll say, at an axial swing of 1,000 miles an hour, making for a place where the swing is, we'll say, 800 miles an hour, be opposed by the westward motion that he started with, amounting to 200 miles an hour at his destination? How would he ever get there without consciously opposing this transverse force from the beginning of his flight? In the winter of 1927-28, flying south and then north, Colonel Lindbergh reported no indication of different axial velocities. Whether this Earth is stationary or not, his experience was the same as it would be if this Earth were stationary. Or Admiral Byrd over the South Pole of this Earth. From a point of this Earth, theoretically, of no axial motion, he flew northward. He flew over land, which, relatively to his progress, spun with increasing velocity, according to the conventionalists. It cannot be said that the air around him was strictly partaking of this alleged motion because gusts were blowing in various directions. Admiral Byrd started northward from a point of no axial swing, partaking himself of no axial swing, and as he traveled northward, the land underneath him did not swing away from him. The air was moving in various directions. There is another field of data. There have been occurrences in the sky which, according to conventionalists, destroy the idea of the stationariness of this Earth and prove its motions. Trying to prove anything is no attempt of mine. We shall have an expression upon luminous night, clouds, and meteor trains. Rather often have been observed luminous night clouds or night clouds that shine, presumably by reflected sunlight, but with the sun so far below the horizon of observers upon this Earth that so to reflect its light, the clouds would have to be 50 or 60 miles high, according to calculations. At this height, it is conceded whatever air there may be does not partake of this Earth's motions. If this Earth be rotating from east to west, these distant clouds not partaking of terrestrial motion would seem to move as left behind from east to west. For an article upon this subject, see the New York Times, April 8, 1928. The statement that such clouds do not partake and do seem to move from east to west has been published by conventionalists. To an observer in Central Europe, they should, as left behind, seem to move from east to west at a rate of about 500 miles an hour by terrestrial rotation. The statement has been made that one of these clouds would seem to move from east to west, the way it should move, at exactly the rate that should be. I make the statement that luminous night clouds have moved north, south, east, and west, sometimes rapidly and sometimes slowly. If somebody can, with data that will have to be accepted, show that more than once luminous night clouds have moved from east to west at a rate of 500 miles an hour in a latitude where they should move at a rate of 500 miles an hour, I should be glad to regret that I have backed the wrong theory, except that you can't down any theorist so easily or at all. And up Bob pointing out that this is another of the shoulds that shouldn't, and that the conventionalists forget about compounding their 500 mile an hour with this Earth's supposed orbital motion of 19 miles a second. All data upon this subject that I know anything of are interpretable as indications that this Earth is stationary. For instance, look up in Nature and other English and French scientific journals observations upon the Great Meteor Train of February 22nd, 1909. This appearance was thought to be as high as any luminous night cloud has ever been thought to be. It was so high that it was watched in France and in England. Here was something which, because it came from externality, was not partaking of any of this Earth's supposed motions. Then it should have shot away from observers by the compounding of two velocities. Whether it came to a stationary Earth or not, it hung in the sky as if it had come to a stationary Earth, drifting considerably but remaining in sight about 2 hours. According to this datum, and it is only one of many, an explorer could go up from the choked. An explorer could go up from this Earth 50 or 60 miles, and though, according to orthodox pronouncements, this Earth would spin away from him, the Earth would not spin away from him. There are data for thinking that aviators who have gone up from the surface of this Earth as far as they suppose they could go have missed entering conditions that, instead of being cold, may be even warmish and may exist all the way to a not-so-very remote shell of stars. Somebody may want to know how it is that, if there be such data, they are not commonly known. But somebody else who has read this book at all carefully will not ask that question. An expression of mine is that all human achievements are compounded with objectives. Let someone go without food for a week, and that is a record of human endurance. Someone else makes his objective a week and a day and achieves in a dying condition. The extension goes on, and someone lives a month without food and reaches the limit of human endurance. Aviators have set their minds upon surpassing the records of other aviators. It is possible that, with its objective a star, an expedition from this Earth could, by merely reaching the limit of human endurance, arrive there. Current literature, September 24th, that 50 miles up, the air is 10 times as dense as used to be supposed, and that it is considerably warmer than at lower levels. See Nature, February 27th, 1908. The following issues. Experiments with balloons that carried temperature recording instruments. According to Mr. W.H. Dines, about 30 balloons, which had been sent up in Great Britain in June 1907, had moved through increasing coldness, then coming to somewhat warmer regions. Period. This change was recorded at a height of about 40,000 feet. Monthly Weather Review 1923, page 316. That, away from this Earth, the temperature falls only to a height of about 7 miles, where it is from 60 to 70 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. But from this altitude to as high as balloons have gone, which is about 15 miles, the temperature has remained about the same. It is said that, according to observations upon light effects of meteor trains, there are reasons for thinking that in their zone of from 30 to 50 miles above this Earth's surface, conditions are mild or not even freezing. For data that may indicate in another field of observations that not enormously far away there is a shell around this Earth. See the newspapers of August 20th, 1925. According to data collected by the Naval Research Laboratory, there is something somewhere in the sky that is deflecting electromagnetic waves of wireless communications in a way that is similar to the way in which sound waves are sent back by the dome of the Capitol at Washington. The published explanation is that there is an ionized zone around this Earth. Those waves are rebounding from something. More was published in the newspapers May 21st, 1927. The existence of a ceiling in the sky had been verified by experiments at Carnegie Institution, September 5th, 1930. A paper read by Professor E.V. Appleton at a meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. The ionized zone is not satisfactory. The subject is as puzzling as it is fascinating, and no decisive answer to the problem can be given at present. From Norway had been reported experiments upon shortwave transmissions, which had been reflected back to this Earth. They had come back as if from a shell-like formation around this Earth, not unthinkably far away.